The silence in my parents' dining room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I stared at my mother across the table, her words still echoing in my ears like a slap that kept stinging. She just looked me dead in the eye and said I didn't matter. My brother Derek smirked beside her, adding that they barely remembered I existed most days. The family dinner that was supposed to celebrate his promotion had turned into my personal execution. But I had something they didn't know about, something that would flip their perfect little world upside down forever. I tapped my fork against my wine glass 3 times and said, "I'll be brief, just 3 sentences." By the time I got to the second one, my mom had already gone ghost white. Let me back up and explain how we got to this moment, because the explosion didn't happen overnight. My name is Alina and I'm 28 years old. I work as a senior accountant at Patterson & Associates downtown, which might sound boring to most people, but I actually love the precision of numbers and the satisfaction of making everything balance perfectly. Tonight was supposed to be special. My parents, Dorothy and Harold, had invited Derek and me over for Sunday dinner to celebrate his recent promotion to regional sales manager at his company. I'd been looking forward to sharing my own good news. Just last week, I'd been promoted to senior accountant with a $15,000 raise. It was a huge step forward in my career, something I'd worked toward for 3 years. I'd even bought a bottle of champagne to bring along, thinking maybe for once we could celebrate both of our successes together as a family. But from the moment I walked through the front door of my childhood home, I could tell this evening would follow the same old pattern. Mom Dorothy barely glanced up from arranging flowers in a crystal vase when I arrived. She was wearing her favorite navy blue dress, the one she always put on when she wanted to look important for company. Her graying hair was perfectly styled, and she'd applied her makeup with the precision of someone preparing for a photo shoot rather than a family dinner. "Oh, good you're here," she said without really looking at me. "Derek's been telling us all about his promotion. Regional sales manager, can you imagine he'll be managing 12 people across 3 states? Derek was already seated in the dining room, sprawled comfortably in his chair like he owned the place. At 31, he still had that boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. His brown hair was perfectly styled with expensive product, and he wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in 2 weeks. He was gesticulating wildly while telling Dad about his new responsibilities, his voice booming with confidence. "The territory stretches from Ohio to Tennessee," Derek was saying as I took my seat. "I'll be traveling constantly, staying in nice hotels, entertaining clients. It's exactly the kind of high-level position I've been working toward." Dad Harold nodded approvingly, his weathered face creased with pride. At 62, he still had the broad shoulders of the construction worker he'd been before moving into project management. His gray mustache twitched with amusement as Derek described his new company car, a luxury sedan with all the bells and whistles. "That's wonderful, son," Dad said, raising his beer bottle in a mock toast. "You've really made something of yourself." I waited for a natural break in the conversation to share my own news. When Derek finally paused to take a drink, I cleared my throat. "Actually, I have some good news to share too. I got promoted to senior accountant this week, and they gave me a substantial raise." The reaction was immediate and predictably disappointing. Mom's expression didn't change at all, as if I just commented on the weather. Dad glanced at me briefly before turning his attention back to Derek. But it was Derek's response that really stung. "Oh, that's nice," he said with a patronizing smile. "Moving up in the accounting world. I'm sure that's fulfilling for you." Mom actually laughed. "Alina, dear, that's lovely, but accounting is so different from Derek's kind of work. He's in sales, dealing with people, building relationships, creating real value for his company. That takes a special kind of talent." "Numbers are important too," I said quietly, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "Of course they are," Derek said, but his tone suggested the opposite. "Someone has to do the paperwork right. It's just that leadership roles like mine require a different skill set, vision, charisma, the ability to inspire people. Not everyone is cut out for that kind of responsibility." The conversation moved on without me after that. For the next hour, I sat there listening to my family dissect every aspect of Derek's promotion, while my own achievement was forgotten completely. They talked about his salary, his benefits, his company car, his travel opportunities. Dad shared stories about Derek's high school football victories. Mom brought out photo albums showing Derek's college graduation, his first job, his various accomplishments over the years. I tried to contribute to the conversation several times, but each attempt was either ignored or quickly redirected back to Derek. When I mentioned a challenging audit I'd just completed that saved my company $50,000, Derek actually rolled his eyes. "See, that's exactly what I mean," he said. "You're focused on saving money, preventing problems, maintaining the status quo. I'm focused on growth expansion, bringing in new business. It's the difference between playing defense and playing offense." Mom nodded sagely. Derek has always been our go-getter. Even as a child, he had such ambition, such drive. "Remember when he started that lawn mowing business in middle school?" Dad added. "Made $300 that summer." "What about when I tutored kids in math and saved up enough to buy my first car?" I asked. "Oh, yes," Mom said dismissively. "You were always good with your little math problems." The words hit me like a physical blow. Little math problems. As if my entire career, my education, my talents were just amusing hobbies rather than legitimate accomplishments. Derek leaned back in his chair, completely oblivious to how his words were affecting me. "The thing is, Alina, you've always been so focused on following rules and staying in your lane. That's fine for some people, but real success requires taking risks, thinking outside the box. Some people are natural leaders, and others are natural followers." "And there's nothing wrong with being a follower," Mom added quickly, as if that made it better. "The world needs people who are content with steady, reliable work." That's when something inside me finally snapped. Not just from tonight's conversation, but from 28 years of being treated like the family's consolation prize. 28 years of having my achievements minimized while Derek was celebrated for things that often weren't even his own accomplishments. 28 years of being told I was too quiet, too serious, too focused on things that didn't really matter. "You know what?" I said, my voice carrying more edge than I'd intended. "I think my work does matter. I think preventing fraud and ensuring financial accuracy is actually pretty important." Derek snorted. "Come on, Elena, don't be so sensitive. We're just having a conversation." "A conversation where everything I do is dismissed as unimportant while you get praised for existing." I shot back. The room went quiet. Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Dad looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Derek's expression shifted from amusement to annoyance. "Now you're being dramatic," Mom said coolly. "No one said your work was unimportant. You said it was different from Derek's real work. You called my expertise little math problems. You've spent 2 hours talking about Derek's promotion and 30 seconds acknowledging mine. Because Derek's promotion actually means something." Mom snapped her composure, finally cracking. "He's going to be managing people, making real decisions affecting his company's bottom line. You're just checking numbers." "Just checking numbers," I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what I actually do? Do you know I caught $1 million embezzlement scheme last year? Do you know companies pay me to find financial crimes that could destroy them?" "That's nice, dear," Mom said, but her tone made it clear she wasn't really listening. "But Derek is going to be leading a whole region. He's going to be responsible for millions of dollars in sales. And I'm responsible for making sure people like Derek don't steal those millions," I said. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Derek's face flushed red. Dad's eyes widened. Mom's expression turned dangerous. "What exactly are you implying?" Derek asked, his voice low and threatening. "I'm not implying anything I said. I'm just pointing out that my work has value too." But Derek wasn't backing down. "It sounds like you're suggesting I would steal from my company." "I never said that." "You absolutely did," Mom interjected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You just accused your own brother of being a criminal." "I did not." "You're being completely inappropriate," Derek said, standing up from his chair. "I invite you to dinner to celebrate my success, and you attack my character because you're jealous of my promotion." I'm not jealous of anything I said, but even I could hear how defensive I sounded. Mom leaned forward, her eyes cold and hard. Elena, you need to listen to me very carefully. Your brother has worked incredibly hard for this promotion. He's earned it through talent, dedication, and natural leadership abilities. The fact that you can't be happy for him shows exactly what kind of person you are. What kind of person am I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Mom looked me dead in the eye, her voice as cutting as a scalpel. You're a nobody who needs to stop acting like you're important. Derek is going places in life. Derek matters. You're just going through the motions, doing busy work, pretending it means something. The words hit me like a truck. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there staring at my mother's face, trying to process what she'd just said to me. Derek, emboldened by Mom's attack, decided to pile on. She's right, you know. We barely even remember you're around most days. You're just there, taking up space, going through your little routines, but you don't actually contribute anything meaningful to this family. That's when I felt something click into place in my mind, something cold and determined. Because what Derek and Mom didn't know is that last month, while cleaning out Grandma Margaret's attic after her funeral, I'd found something. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about our family. Something that would flip their perfect little hierarchy upside down and show them exactly what kind of person they were really dealing with. I reached for my fork and tapped it against my wine glass 3 times. The sharp, clear sound cut through the tension in the room like a bell tolling. You know what? I said, my voice suddenly calm and steady. I think you're right. It's time for some honesty in this family. I'll be brief. Just 3 sentences. The first sentence came out of my mouth like a blade cutting through silk. Derek, when I was cleaning out Grandma Margaret's attic last month, I found an envelope with your name on it. Derek's smirk faltered slightly, but he tried to maintain his composure. So Grandma probably left me a nice card or something. She always liked me best. Inside that envelope, I continued watching his face carefully, were adoption papers showing that you were found abandoned at a Texaco gas station in Cleveland when you were 3 years old, malnourished, and wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks. The effect was immediate and devastating. Derek's face went from confident pink to sickly gray in the span of 2 seconds. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom's fork clattered against her plate, and Dad made a choking sound that might have been surprise or might have been something else entirely. That's not true, Derek whispered, but his voice had lost all its earlier bravado. That's not possible. You're lying. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photocopied documents I'd made before returning the originals to their hiding place. The paperwork is dated September 15, 1993. You were approximately 3 years old according to the medical examination, severely underweight, multiple bruises in various stages of healing, no identification, no records of any family looking for you. Mom suddenly found her voice, though it came out strangled and high-pitched. Elena, you don't know what you're talking about. Those papers, they must be for someone else, some other child. Derek Allen Morrison. I read from the papers. Born approximately June 12, 1990, found at Texaco Station on Brook Park Road in Cleveland. Placed in emergency foster care with Harold and Dorothy Morrison pending permanent placement. Adoption finalized December 3, 1993. Ease. The silence in the room was deafening. Derek stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. His hands were shaking now, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the house. This doesn't make sense, he said, his voice breaking like a teenager's. Mom, Dad, tell her this is crazy. Tell her these are fake. But Mom and Dad weren't looking at Derek. They were looking at each other with the expression of 2 people who'd just been caught in a lie they'd been telling for 30 years. Dad cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. We never meant for you to find out this way. Find out what? Derek screamed, his composure completely shattered. Find out that my entire life is a lie. Find out that you're not my real parents. Find out that I'm some throwaway kid you picked up at a gas station. You're our son, Mom said quickly, reaching across the table toward Derek's hand. Biology doesn't matter. We raised you. We loved you. We gave you everything. But Derek jerked his hand away, like she was on fire. Everything you gave me, everything you built my entire identity on a lie, every birthday, every family photo, every story about when I was born, all of it was fake. The love wasn't fake, Dad said quietly. The pride we feel in your accomplishments isn't fake. You're our boy, Derek. You always have been. But not really. Derek said, his voice hollow now. Not by blood, not by birth. I'm just some random kid whose real parents didn't want him enough to keep him fed and clean. I watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. I'd expected Derek to be shocked, but I hadn't anticipated how completely the revelation would destroy his sense of self. For all his arrogance and cruelty, he was still my brother in every way that mattered, and seeing him fall apart was harder than I'd thought it would be. Mom was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We were going to tell you someday, when you were older, when you were ready. I'm 31 years old, Derek shouted. When exactly were you planning to share this information at my wedding? When I had kids of my own? We thought it would be easier if you never knew, Dad admitted. You were so young when we got you. You didn't remember anything from before. We figured it would just complicate things. Complicate things, Derek repeated bitterly. Right, can't have complications in the perfect Morrison family story. But I wasn't finished. The adoption papers were just the beginning. While I'd been researching Derek's background to verify the documents I'd found, I'd discovered something else. Something that made his current situation even more precarious than he realized. There's more, I said quietly. Derek's head snapped up his eyes, red-rimmed and wild. More, what else could there possibly be? While I was looking into your background, I decided to check some other things. Public records, financial documents, corporate filings. I paused, watching his face carefully. You know the kind of little math problems that are my specialty. Derek's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. What are you talking about? Your company, Morrison Industries, had to file public financial disclosures as part of their recent expansion. Those filings include detailed records of vendor payments, consulting fees, and contracted services. I pulled another set of papers from my purse. Funny thing about being an accountant, you develop an eye for patterns, irregularities, things that don't quite add up. Mom was staring at me now with undisguised horror. Alina, what are you doing? I'm being thorough, I said. See, when I looked at your company's vendor payments over the past year, Derek, I noticed some interesting entries. Payments to consulting firms with names like Strategic Solutions LLC and Business Development Associates. Nothing unusual there, except when I cross-referenced those companies with state business registrations, I found something fascinating. Derek's face had gone from gray to green. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Those companies don't exist, I continued. Well, they exist on paper. They have business licenses. They have bank accounts. But they don't have offices. They don't have employees. They don't have any business operations at all. They're what we call shell companies, entities created solely to receive payments for services never rendered. You don't know what you're talking about, Derek managed to croak. Don't I? I spread the papers across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Here's a payment to Strategic Solutions for $25,000 in market analysis consulting. Here's another to Business Development Associates for $15,000 in operational efficiency review. Here's a third to Morrison Consulting Services. Interesting name choice there, for $18,000 in strategic planning facilitation. Dad was staring at the papers with the expression of a man watching his house burn down. Derek, tell me this isn't what it looks like. It's not what it looks like, Derek said automatically, but his voice carried no conviction. Really? I asked. Because when I trace the bank routing numbers for these payments, they all lead to accounts opened with your Social Security number, accounts that you're the sole signatory on, accounts that show regular deposits from Morrison Industries followed immediately by cash withdrawals or transfers to your personal checking account. The room was spinning now, at least from Derek's perspective. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself, his knuckles white with strain. Over the past year, I continued relentlessly. You've stolen approximately $57,000 from your employer through fraudulent vendor payments. That's wire fraud, Derek. That's a federal crime. And with your new promotion to regional sales manager, you'll have access to even larger budgets, even more opportunities to expand your little side business. Mom was hyperventilating now, taking short, sharp breaths like she couldn't get enough air. Dad just sat there staring at Derek with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. "I can explain," Derek said weakly. "Can you," I asked, "can you explain why you created fake companies to steal from the employer that just promoted you? Can you explain why you've been committing federal crimes while lecturing me about the importance of your legitimate business success?" Derek's mouth opened and closed several times, but no explanation came out. Because there wasn't one. There was no justification for what he'd done, no excuse that could transform theft into anything resembling legitimate business practice. The really ironic thing, I said, my voice soft but cutting, is that you spent all evening telling me how unimportant my work is, how accounting is just checking numbers and paperwork. But if you'd had a decent accountant review your fake vendor scheme, they would have told you that you were creating a paper trail that any competent investigator could follow. They would have told you that federal wire fraud charges carry sentences of up to 20 years in prison. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Are you going to turn me in?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mom and Dad were both staring at me now, waiting for my answer. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that I almost felt dizzy. An hour ago, I was the family disappointment, the boring accountant whose accomplishments didn't matter. Now I was holding Derek's future in my hands. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That depends." "On what?" Derek asked desperately. "On whether you're finally ready to stop pretending you're better than everyone else. On whether you're willing to admit that maybe the sister you've been dismissing your whole life actually knows what she's talking about." But even as I said the words, I realized that Derek's embezzlement was just the tip of the iceberg. Because while I'd been investigating his fraudulent vendor scheme, I'd discovered other irregularities, other problems that went far deeper than stolen consulting fees. Problems that involved not just Derek, but our parents as well. Derek was still reeling from the embezzlement revelation when I decided to drop the next bomb. His face looked like he'd been hit by a truck, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. "Actually, Derek," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around me, "your theft from the company isn't even the worst thing I discovered." Mom's head snapped up from where she'd been sobbing into her hands. "What do you mean? What else could there possibly be?" "Well," I continued, pulling yet another folder from my purse. While I was tracing Derek's financial activities, I stumbled across some other interesting documents, specifically records related to Grandma Margaret's estate. Dad's face went white as a sheet. "Alina, that's private family business." "Is it?" I asked. Because according to the will that Grandma Margaret filed with the county clerk's office 6 months before she died, her entire estate was supposed to be left to me, her only granddaughter, the one who visited her every Sunday for the last 3 years of her life, the one who helped her with her medications and grocery shopping and doctor's appointments while the rest of you were too busy to call. The effect of this statement was immediate and dramatic. Mom stopped crying abruptly, her tear-streaked face going rigid with something that looked like panic. Dad started coughing like he'd swallowed his tongue. Derek, who'd been slumped in defeat over the embezzlement revelation, suddenly sat up straighter. "That's not possible," Mom said quickly. "The estate is still being processed through probate. These things take time." "Do they?" I asked, spreading the documents across the table. Because according to these bank statements, the estate account has been very active over the past 18 months. Lots of transfers, lots of payments, lots of activity for an estate that's supposedly still being processed. I watched their faces as the implications sank in. Dad's eyes were darting between the papers, and Mom's face, like he was watching a tennis match. Mom looked like she was calculating how fast she could run to her car. Derek just looked confused, which was understandable since he was still processing the fact that his entire identity was built on lies. "Here's a transfer for $15,000 to Derek's checking account," I said, pointing to a highlighted line on the bank statement, dated 3 months ago. "And here's another for $8,000 2 months later. And here's a payment of $12,000 directly to Derek's mortgage company." Derek's confusion was rapidly transforming into understanding, and understanding was transforming into horror. "Mom, Dad, what is she talking about?" "It's complicated," Dad said weakly. "Complicated." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's complicated about stealing my inheritance to pay for Derek's lifestyle?" "We didn't steal anything," Mom protested. "We were helping Derek through a difficult time. He was struggling financially, and we thought Grandma would have wanted us to help family." "Grandma wanted to help family," I said. "That's why she left her money to me, the granddaughter who actually spent time with her, the one who listened to her stories and helped her when she was sick, the one she specifically named in her will." "But Derek needed the money," Mom said, as if that explained everything. "He was behind on his mortgage. His credit cards were maxed out. He was about to lose his house." "His house that he bought with money he stole from his employer?" I asked pointedly. Derek's mouth fell open. "How did you know about the house payments?" "Because unlike everyone else in this family, I actually pay attention to financial details. When someone starts making mortgage payments on a house that costs 3 times their legitimate salary, it raises questions." I pulled out another set of documents, these ones, showing Derek's mortgage application and income verification. "According to your loan application, Derek, you claimed an annual income of $95,000. But according to your actual tax returns, which are public record, since your company is publicly traded, your real salary is $62,000. Dad was rubbing his forehead like he had a massive headache. "This is getting out of hand." "Is it?" I asked. "Because I'm just getting started. See, when you lie about your income to get a mortgage, that's called mortgage fraud. It's another federal crime. And when you use stolen money to make payments on that fraudulently obtained mortgage, well, that's just a whole other level of criminal activity." Derek was hyperventilating now, taking short, panicked breaths. "I never meant for any of this to happen. It just got out of control." "Well, what got out of control?" I pressed. "The lying about your income, the stealing from your employer, the using our dead grandmother's money to pay for your criminal lifestyle." "All of it," Derek shouted, his composure completely shattered. "Everything. I was drowning in debt and I didn't know what else to do. The company promotion came with higher expectations, and I needed to look successful. I needed the right clothes, the right car, the right house. I needed to project an image of success." "So you decided to steal success instead of earning it," I said. "I was going to pay it all back," Derek insisted. "Once I got established in my new position, once I started making real money, I was going to make everything right." "With what money?" I asked. "The money you were planning to steal from your new regional budget." Derek didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The answer was written all over his face. Mom was crying again, but these weren't tears of sadness or shock. These were tears of desperation. "Elena, you have to understand. We were trying to help Derek build a life for himself. He's had such a hard time growing up without knowing about his background. We thought giving him stability, helping him succeed, was the right thing to do." "By stealing my inheritance?" I asked. "By investing in family?" Dad said, but his voice carried no conviction. "Your grandmother loved Derek too. She would have wanted him to have opportunities." "She loved Derek enough to include him in her will," I said. "She left him $5,000 for his education. 5,000, not 50,000. The rest was specifically designated for me with clear instructions that it was to be used for my future, my house, my education, my financial security." The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear a neighbor starting up a lawnmower, the sound of normal life continuing, while our family imploded around the dinner table. "How much?" Derek asked quietly. "How much what? How much did they take? How much of your inheritance?" I consulted my notes, though I already knew the numbers by heart. $58,437, plus interest and investment returns that should have accumulated over 18 months. Total value of what was stolen from me is approximately $64,000. Derek put his head in his hands. Oh God, I'm so sorry, Elena. I didn't know it was your money. I thought it was just family money, something Mom and Dad had saved up." "You didn't ask where it came from," I pointed out. "You just took it." "I was desperate," Derek said, his voice muffled by his hands. "I know that's not an excuse, but I was scared of losing everything. The house, the car, my job, if they found out about my debts. I felt like I was drowning." Mom was looking back and forth between Derek and me like she was trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. "We can fix this. We can pay you back, Alina. We'll take out a loan, refinance the house, whatever it takes." "With what income?" I asked. "Derek's about to lose his job when his employer discovers his embezzlement. And even if he doesn't go to prison, no legitimate company is going to hire him after this. How exactly are you planning to pay back $64,000? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Because the truth was, they couldn't pay me back, not without destroying their own financial stability. And even if they could, the damage was already done. The trust was broken. The family dynamics that had held us together for 30 years were crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. But I still wasn't finished. Because while investigating Derek's embezzlement and the theft of my inheritance, I discovered something else. Something that made the entire situation even more complicated and heartbreaking than it already was. "There's one more thing," I said quietly. Derek looked up from his hands, his eyes red and swollen. "What now?" While I was checking Derek's financial records, I decided to run a credit check. To see the full scope of his debt situation. I paused, watching their faces. That's when I discovered that someone has been using my Social Security number to open credit accounts. The blood drained from Derek's face so quickly, I thought he might pass out. Mom made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Dad just stared at me with the expression of a man watching his world end. Credit cards, personal loans, even a business line of credit. I pulled out the credit reports I'd printed, all opened using my personal information, all showing payment histories that have destroyed my credit score, all bearing Derek's signatures as an authorized user. "That's identity theft," Dad whispered. "Yes," I said simply. "It is." The identity theft revelation hit the room like a bomb going off. Derek's face had gone from pale to green, and he looked like he might actually vomit right there at the dinner table. Mom was hyperventilating, clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. Dad just sat there staring at the credit reports like they were written in hieroglyphics. "I can explain," Derek said weakly, but his voice carried about as much conviction as a child claiming the dog ate his homework. "Please do," I said, spreading the credit reports across the table next to all the other evidence I'd accumulated. "Explain how you opened 4 credit cards and a $15,000 personal loan using my Social Security number." Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "I was going to pay everything back before you ever found out. I just needed some time to get back on my feet." "Back on your feet?" I repeated incredulously. "Derek, you've been systematically destroying my financial future for 2 years. My credit score went from 780 to 490. Do you have any idea what that means?" "I know it's bad," Derek said miserably. "Bad." I stood up from my chair, too agitated to sit still anymore. "It's catastrophic. I can't get a mortgage. I can't refinance my car. I can't even open a bank account at some institutions. You've made me financially radioactive." Mom was crying again, but these tears looked different somehow, more desperate, more frightened. "Derek, how could you do this to your sister?" "It wasn't supposed to hurt her." Derek protested. I was keeping up with the payments. I was maintaining the accounts responsibly. I laughed bitterly and pointed to one of the credit reports. Responsibly, this card shows 3 missed payments in the last 6 months. This loan is currently 60 days past due. This business line of credit is maxed out and hasn't been paid in 2 months. Derek buried his face in his hands again. I've been struggling lately. The promotion expenses, the mortgage, trying to keep up with everything. I fell behind on some stuff. Some stuff, I repeated. Derek, these aren't your accounts to fall behind on. These are my accounts, my credit, my financial future that you've been gambling with. Dad finally found his voice, though it came out rough and strained. Son, this is serious. This is federal crime territory. I know, Derek whispered. Do you? I asked, because identity theft carries sentences of up to 15 years in federal prison. Add that to the wire fraud from your embezzlement scheme, and you're looking at potentially decades behind bars. The room went quiet except for the sound of Derek's ragged breathing and Mom's occasional sniffles. Outside, the neighbor had finished mowing and was now using a leaf blower, the mechanical whine creating an oddly appropriate soundtrack to our family's destruction. I walked over to the window and looked out at the perfectly manicured suburban street where I'd grown up. Everything looked so normal out there. Kids riding bicycles, people walking dogs, regular families living regular lives without federal crimes and stolen inheritances, and identity theft hanging over their dinner conversations. How did you get my personal information? I asked without turning around. The silence stretched long enough that I turned back to face the table. Derek was staring at his hands, but Mom was looking guilty about something. Derek, I said more firmly, how did you get my social security number, my date of birth, my address history, the kind of detailed personal information you'd need to convince credit companies to open accounts in my name? More silence. But Mom was shifting uncomfortably in her chair now, and her eyes were darting between Derek and Dad, like she was trying to send some kind of signal. Mom, I said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Did you help him? I didn't know what he was going to do with it, Mom said quickly. He said he needed some information for a family insurance policy, something about making sure all the beneficiaries were properly documented. I stared at her in disbelief. You gave Derek my personal information for a fake insurance policy. It wasn't fake when he asked for it, Mom protested. He said his company was offering a family life insurance benefit, and he needed to list his immediate relatives as potential beneficiaries. And you believed that? Why wouldn't I believe it? Mom's voice was getting defensive now. He's my son. I trust him. Your son, who you just found out, has been embezzling money from his employer, I pointed out. We didn't know about that when he asked for the information, Dad said quietly. When exactly did he ask for it? I demanded. Mom and Dad exchanged another one of those guilty looks. About 2 years ago, Mom admitted. 2 years ago, right around the time the first fraudulent credit account was opened in my name. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. Derek asked you for my personal information 2 years ago under false pretenses. You gave it to him without checking with me. He used that information to open credit accounts in my name. And you've all been keeping this secret while I've been wondering why my credit score was mysteriously tanking. We didn't know he was using your information for credit applications, Dad said. But you knew something was wrong when Derek suddenly had money for a down payment on a house he couldn't afford. You knew something was wrong when he was driving a car that cost more than his annual salary. You knew something was wrong when he was wearing designer suits and taking expensive vacations on a sales associate's budget. We thought he was just good with money, Mom said weakly. Good with money. I turned to face Derek directly. Is that what you told them, that you were just naturally gifted at financial management? Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. I told them I'd been investing, making smart choices with my savings. What savings? I asked. According to your tax returns, you've never reported investment income. According to your bank statements, you've never had more than $3,000 in savings at any given time. Where exactly were these mysterious investment profits coming from? Derek didn't answer, but he didn't need to. We all knew where the money was coming from: stolen consulting fees from his employer. My grandmother's inheritance, that should have been mine. Credit accounts opened fraudulently in my name. Derek hadn't been successful or smart or naturally gifted at anything except lying and stealing. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down at it automatically. It was from my neighbor asking if everything was okay, because she could hear shouting from my parents' house. I realized I'd been raising my voice without meaning to, letting my anger and frustration spill out in ways that weren't helping anyone. I took a deep breath and sat back down at the table. The evidence was spread out in front of us like the aftermath of an explosion. Adoption papers, embezzlement, documentation, bank statements, showing the theft of my inheritance credit reports, showing the identity theft. 2 hours ago, we'd been celebrating Derek's promotion. Now we were staring at proof of multiple federal crimes and a family built on decades of lies. Derek, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money. This isn't just about family drama or hurt feelings. You've committed serious crimes. Crimes that will destroy your life and potentially Mom and Dad's lives too if this goes public. Derek nodded miserably. I know, I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you really grasp how deep this goes. Your employer is going to discover the embezzlement eventually. Corporate audits always catch this kind of thing. When they do, they're going to file criminal charges. The FBI investigates wire fraud. Federal prosecutors don't plea bargain these cases down to community service and probation. What are you saying? Mom asked fearfully. I'm saying Derek is looking at serious prison time, federal prison, and if they discover that you helped him by providing information for the identity theft, you could be charged as an accomplice. The weight of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Mom started crying again, but quietly this time. Dad was staring at his hands, probably calculating how much money they'd need for criminal defense attorneys. Derek just looked broken, like a man who'd finally realized that his house of cards was collapsing and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But even as I watched my family fall apart around the dinner table, I knew we hadn't hit bottom yet. Because just as I'd been gathering evidence about Derek's crimes, fate had decided to intervene in ways that none of us could have anticipated. And the intervention was about to walk right up to our front door. The doorbell rang, cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. My mom looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't matter," so I hit back with... The doorbell's sharp chime cut through our family crisis like a fire alarm. We all froze, staring at each other across the table littered with evidence of Derek's crimes. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We just sat there, like deer caught in headlights, as if staying perfectly still might make whoever was at the door simply disappear. The bell rang again, followed by firm, authoritative knocking. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked Dad, though. My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Dad shook his head, his face pale as parchment. Mom had stopped crying and was now staring toward the front door with the expression of someone who'd just heard her own death sentence being read. Derek looked like he might pass out. What if it's the police? What if they already know about everything? Calm down, I said, though my own heart was racing. It could be anyone. A neighbor, a delivery person, someone selling something. But even as I said the words, something in my gut told me this wasn't a social call. The knocking was too purposeful, too official. This was the sound of people who expected to be let in. Dad stood up slowly like an old man despite being only 62. I guess I should answer it. Wait, Derek said desperately. What if we just don't answer? What if we pretend nobody's home? Derek, there are 4 cars in the driveway, I pointed out, and lights on in every room. Nobody's going to believe the house is empty. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by voices. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was definitely official, professional, the kind of voices that belonged to people who were accustomed to having doors opened for them. Dad walked toward the front hallway like he was walking toward his own execution. We could hear his footsteps on the hardwood floor, hear the deadbolt turning, hear the front door creaking open on its hinges. "Mr. Derek Morrison," a woman's voice asked clearly. My blood turned to ice water. They weren't here for Dad. They were here for Derek. He's in the dining room. Dad's voice carried back to us, defeated and hollow. Footsteps approached, and suddenly 2 people appeared in the dining room doorway. A woman in her 40s wearing a crisp navy blue suit, and a man about the same age in a charcoal gray suit that screamed federal agent or corporate investigator. Both carried leather portfolios and had the kind of serious expressions that meant business. "Mr. Derek Morrison?" the woman asked again, looking directly at Derek. Derek nodded weakly, apparently unable to find his voice. "I'm Susan Walsh, Director of Corporate Security for Morrison Industries. This is Michael Torres, our senior fraud investigator. We need to speak with you immediately." The irony of Derek working for a company called Morrison Industries, given that Morrison wasn't even his real last name, would have been funny under different circumstances. But there was nothing funny about the situation unfolding in our dining room. Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to croak out, "What's this about?" Susan Walsh's eyes swept across the table, taking in the scattered papers, the evidence I'd laid out, the obvious signs of a family in crisis. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. "Mr. Morrison, you were scheduled to appear for a mandatory interview this afternoon regarding irregularities discovered in your department's vendor payment records. When you failed to appear, HR attempted to contact you multiple times. Your absence constitutes a violation of your employment agreement and company policy regarding ongoing investigations." Derek's face went from green to gray. I forgot. I've been having a family emergency. "Have you—" Michael Torres asked, his voice carrying just enough skepticism to make everyone uncomfortable. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your family emergency involves discussing the exact same financial documents that prompted our investigation." I felt like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. Susan Walsh's eyes had settled on the papers spread across our table. The bank statements, the vendor payment records, the evidence of Derek's embezzlement scheme that I'd so carefully documented. "Ma'am." Susan addressed me directly. "Are you familiar with these documents?" I glanced at Derek, who was staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes. But I'd already made my choice when I decided to confront him tonight. I wasn't going to compound his crimes by lying to federal investigators. "Yes," I said clearly, "I am." "And your relationship to Mr. Morrison—" "I'm his sister. My name is Alina Morrison. I'm a senior accountant with Patterson & Associates." Susan and Michael exchanged a meaningful look. "Ms. Morrison, would you mind explaining how you came to be in possession of what appear to be Morrison Industries financial records?" This was it. The moment where I either became complicit in Derek's crimes or helped bring them to light. I looked around the table at my family. Mom crying silently, Dad looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour, Derek silently begging me not to destroy him. But then I thought about my destroyed credit rating, my stolen inheritance, the years of being dismissed and belittled while Derek was praised for accomplishments built on lies and theft. I thought about the companies and individuals who would suffer if Derek's embezzlement went undiscovered and unpunished. "I discovered irregularities while researching Derek's financial situation," I said. "As an accountant, I recognized the patterns of potential fraud and documented what I found." Susan Walsh pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table. "Ms. Morrison, would you be willing to make a formal statement regarding your findings?" Derek made a choking sound. "Alina, please don't do this to me. I'm your brother." "You're my brother who's been destroying my financial future for 2 years," I replied. "You're my brother who stole my inheritance to fund your criminal lifestyle. You're my brother who's been lying to everyone in this family for God knows how long." "We can work this out as a family," Mom pleaded. "We don't need to involve outsiders." Michael Torres cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, embezzlement and wire fraud aren't family matters. They're federal crimes." Federal crimes, Dad's voice cracked like he was hitting puberty again. Mr. Morrison's activities involve fraudulent payments across state lines using electronic banking systems, Susan explained. That makes it wire fraud, which falls under federal jurisdiction. We're also looking at potential tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. Derek was hyperventilating now, taking short, panicked breaths like he couldn't get enough oxygen. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a few $100s here and there to cover expenses. But then it got bigger, and I couldn't stop. Mr. Morrison. Susan said firmly, I need to advise you that anything you say right now can and will be used against you in criminal proceedings. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Oh, God, Mom whispered. Oh, God, they're arresting him. We're not arresting anyone tonight, Michael Torres clarified. But Mr. Morrison will need to surrender his company credit cards, laptop, and building access immediately. He's suspended pending the outcome of our investigation. Susan Walsh turned back to me. Ms. Morrison, your documentation appears to be quite thorough. Have you had any formal training in fraud investigation? I'm a certified public accountant with a specialty in forensic accounting, I replied. I've worked on embezzlement cases before, just not involving family members. Would you be available to consult with our investigation team? Your insights into Mr. Morrison's methods and your access to related financial information could be invaluable. Derek made a sound like a wounded animal. You're going to help them prosecute me. Your own brother. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd shaped so much of my childhood and adult life. This person who'd been held up as the golden child while I was dismissed as unimportant. This brother who'd stolen my identity, my inheritance, and my financial future without a second thought. Derek, I said quietly, you stopped being my brother the moment you decided I didn't matter enough to protect. Susan Walsh was watching this exchange with professional interest. Ms. Morrison, our investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting Mr. Morrison's fraudulent activities may extend beyond simple vendor payment schemes. We've found irregularities dating back several years and potentially involving multiple employers. Multiple employers? Dad asked weakly. Yes. We're coordinating with federal investigators to examine Mr. Morrison's employment history. There appear to be similar patterns of financial irregularities at his previous two positions. The room fell silent as this information sank in. Derek hadn't just been stealing from Morrison Industries. He'd been running these schemes for years, moving from company to company, leaving a trail of financial destruction in his wake. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Michael Torres consulted his notes. At Morrison Industries alone, we've identified approximately $237,000 in fraudulent payments over the past 4 years. $237,000. I'd only found evidence of $57,000, which meant Derek's criminal enterprise was more than 4 times larger than I'd discovered. Mom was crying again, but these weren't tears of sadness or shock anymore. These were tears of absolute despair. Derek, how could you do this? How could you put our family through this? I was trying to make something of myself, Derek said brokenly. I was trying to be successful, to make you proud, to prove that I was worth saving when you found me at that gas station. You were already worth saving, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. You didn't need to prove anything to us. Yes, I did, Derek shot back. I've never been good enough. I've never been smart enough. I've never been anything except the abandoned kid you took pity on. That's not true, Mom protested. Isn't it? Derek looked around the table. Elena was always the smart one, the responsible one, the one with actual talents and achievements. I was just the charming one, the salesman, the one who could talk his way through anything. But that's not enough to build a real life on. Susan Walsh cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps this family discussion would be better continued after we've concluded our business. Mr. Morrison, we'll need you to come with us to surrender your company property and sign some paperwork. Derek nodded miserably. Am I going to jail tonight? Not tonight, Susan said. But you should be prepared for criminal charges to be filed within the next few weeks. I strongly recommend you consult with a criminal defense attorney immediately." As Derek stood up to leave with the investigators, he looked back at me one last time. "Elena, I know you have every right to hate me. I know I've destroyed everything. But please remember that I never meant to hurt you specifically. I got lost. I made terrible choices, and I kept making them because I didn't know how to stop." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because despite everything Derek had done to me, despite all the lies and theft and manipulation, he was still the brother I'd grown up with. He was still the person who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework and defended me against playground bullies. But that person had made choices. Choices that led to this moment sitting in our childhood dining room while federal investigators documented his crimes. As Susan and Michael left with Derek, the house fell into a silence so profound it felt like death itself. Mom, Dad, and I sat there staring at each other, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant for our family's future. None of us could have predicted what would happen next. After the investigators left with Derek, our house felt like a tomb. The three of us sat in the dining room, staring at the scattered evidence of Derek's crimes without speaking. The only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking time like a countdown to disaster. It was Dad who finally broke the silence. "How long do you think we have before this becomes public?" I considered the question carefully. Corporate investigations usually take a few weeks to complete, but given the scope of what Derek's done and the fact that federal authorities are involved, I'd say we have maybe a month before criminal charges are filed. Mom had stopped crying, but her face looked hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only an empty shell. "What happens to us, to the house, to our savings?" "That depends on how much you knew and when you knew it," I said honestly. "If prosecutors believe you were complicit in Derek's crimes, you could face charges as accessories. If they believe you were just victims of Derek's manipulation, you'll probably be okay legally. But not financially," Dad said grimly. "No, probably not financially." I gathered up the papers scattered across the table, organizing them back into neat piles. The evidence of Derek's embezzlement, the records of my stolen inheritance, the credit reports showing the identity theft. All of it would need to be turned over to investigators as evidence. "There's something else," I said reluctantly. "Something I didn't mention while Derek was here, because I didn't want to make things worse for him." Mom and Dad looked up at me with matching expressions of dread. The investigators from Morrison Industries aren't the only ones looking into Derek's activities. When I was researching his background, I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division to ask about proper procedures for reporting suspected embezzlement. Dad's face went white. "You called the FBI?" "I called their tip line to ask hypothetical questions about reporting procedures. But when I described the scope of Derek's activities, they opened a preliminary investigation." Mom made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. "An FBI investigation into our son." "Into Derek's criminal activities, yes. And Mom, there's something else you need to know. The FBI agent I spoke with, Agent Patricia Coleman, told me that Derek's embezzlement scheme fits the pattern of organized financial fraud. They think he might be connected to other people running similar schemes." The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, marking an hour since Derek had left with the corporate investigators. It felt like a lifetime had passed since I'd first tapped my fork against the wine glass and started this avalanche of revelations. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down and saw it was from an unknown number. "This is Agent Coleman from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I understand there have been developments in the Derek Morrison case. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I showed the message to Mom and Dad. Dad's hands were shaking as he read it. "They want to talk to you tonight?" Mom asked. "It looks that way." Before I could say anything else, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the same number from the text message. "Ms. Morrison, this is Special Agent Patricia Coleman. I understand you've had some visitors this evening." Yes, ma'am, corporate investigators from Derek's company. I see. Ms. Morrison federal investigators have been monitoring the situation at Morrison Industries as part of a broader investigation into fraudulent vendor payment schemes. Your brother's activities are connected to a much larger criminal network than you might realize. I felt my stomach drop. How much larger? We've identified at least 6 individuals running similar embezzlement schemes at companies across 3 states. The total amount stolen exceeds $2 million. We believe your brother was recruited into this network through online forums where people share techniques for committing financial crimes. I sank into a chair feeling dizzy. $2 million. A criminal network. Online forums for sharing fraud techniques. Derek wasn't just a desperate employee who'd made some bad choices. He was part of an organized criminal enterprise. Agent Coleman, what does this mean for Derek and for my family? That depends on several factors. How cooperative he is with our investigation, whether he's willing to provide information about the other network members, whether he's considered a leader or a follower in the organization. And if he doesn't cooperate, federal sentencing guidelines for his level of involvement could result in 15 to 20 years in prison. Mom was listening to my side of the conversation, and I watched her face crumble as she realized the implications. 15 to 20 years. Derek was 31 years old. If he went to prison for that long, he'd be middle-aged when he got out. His entire life would be destroyed. Agent Coleman, I've been documenting Derek's financial activities. I have evidence of embezzlement, identity theft, and the theft of inheritance money. Would that information be useful to your investigation? Extremely useful. Ms. Morrison, would you be available to meet with our investigation team tomorrow morning? We'd like to review your findings and discuss the possibility of you consulting on the broader case. Consulting, I repeated. Your forensic accounting skills and your access to Derek's personal information make you uniquely valuable to this investigation. We'd be willing to compensate you for your time and expertise. I looked at Mom and Dad, both staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Horror, betrayal, resignation. Maybe all 3. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. But Ms. Morrison, I want you to understand something. With or without your cooperation, this investigation is moving forward. Derek is going to face federal charges. The question is whether those charges will be reduced in exchange for his cooperation, or whether he'll face the full weight of federal prosecution. After I hung up, the 3 of us sat in silence again. But this silence felt different, heavier, more final. You're going to help them, Mom said. It wasn't a question. I think I have to. Even though it means sending Derek to prison for most of his adult life. Mom, Derek sent himself to prison the moment he decided to steal money from his employer. I didn't make those choices for him. But you're choosing to help destroy him. I stood up, feeling anger surge through me again. I'm choosing to help catch criminals. Derek happens to be one of them. He's your brother, Dad said quietly. He's a criminal who's been systematically destroying my financial future for 2 years, I shot back. He's a thief who stole my inheritance to fund his fake lifestyle. He's a fraud who's been lying to everyone in this family for years. He's still family, Mom insisted. Is he? I asked. Because family members don't usually steal each other's identities. Family members don't usually forge documents and destroy each other's credit ratings. Family members don't usually embezzle money from their employers while lecturing their siblings about the importance of honest work. Mom was crying again, but quietly this time. Dad just looked exhausted, like a man who'd fought a long battle and finally realized he wasn't going to win. What happens now? Dad asked. Now I meet with the FBI tomorrow morning and turn over all the evidence I've collected. Derek gets arrested probably within the next week. You 2 figure out whether you can afford criminal defense attorneys and how much of your retirement savings you're willing to spend trying to keep Derek out of federal prison. And you, Mom asked, what happens to you? I get my life back, I said simply. I get my credit rating restored. I get my inheritance recovered. I get to move forward without Derek's crimes hanging over my head. And your family, what happens to us. I looked around the dining room where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. The room where Derek and I had done homework together as children. The room where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and graduations. The room where just hours earlier I'd been dismissed as unimportant and told I didn't matter. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess that depends on whether you can forgive Derek for what he's done, and whether you can forgive yourselves for enabling it. I gathered my purse and the copies of documents I'd made. I'm going home. I have an early meeting tomorrow with federal investigators. As I walked toward the front door, Mom called after me. Elena, please, don't do this. Don't destroy our family. I stopped and turned back to face her. Mom Derek destroyed our family the moment he decided I didn't matter enough to protect. I'm just cleaning up the mess he left behind. But even as I said the words, I knew the worst was yet to come. Because federal investigations have a way of uncovering things that families would prefer to keep buried. And Derek's crimes were just the tip of the iceberg. I made it halfway to my car before I heard the crash from inside the house. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by Mom's scream, sent me running back through the front door without a second thought. I found Dad collapsed on the dining room floor, his face gray and sweaty, clutching his chest with both hands. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and his eyes had rolled back so only the whites were showing. Call 911. I shouted to Mom, dropping to my knees beside Dad. But Mom was frozen in place, staring down at Dad with her mouth open in shock. I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services while starting chest compressions, the way I'd learned during workplace safety training at Patterson and Associates. I need an ambulance at 47 Maple Street. 62-year-old male apparent heart attack, unconscious, but breathing. Is he responding to verbal commands? The dispatcher asked. Dad, can you hear me? I called loudly while continuing compressions. Dad's eyes fluttered, but he didn't respond coherently. Negative. Unresponsive, but pulse is present. Ambulance is en route. Continue CPR and stay on the line. As I worked on Dad, I could hear Mom in the background, but instead of helping or offering support, she was saying something that made my blood boil. This is your fault, Mom was saying, her voice shrill with hysteria. This is all your fault, Elena. He wouldn't be having a heart attack if you hadn't torn this family apart tonight. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad was lying unconscious on the floor, possibly dying, and Mom was more concerned with blaming me than helping him. Yeah, Mom, instead of pointing fingers, maybe you could get me some towels and clear a path for the paramedics, I said through gritted teeth while continuing compressions. Don't tell me what to do, Mom snapped. You've done enough damage for one night. I've done enough damage. I stopped compressions for a moment to stare at her. Mom, I didn't embezzle money from my employer. I didn't steal anyone's identity. I didn't lie to my family for years. I didn't create this situation. You exposed it, Mom said accusingly. You could have handled this privately within the family. You didn't have to bring in outsiders and make everything public. Dad's breathing became more labored, and I resumed CPR while fighting the urge to scream at Mom. Handling it privately is how Derek was able to steal from me for 2 years. Handling it privately is how he was able to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from his employer. He's still your brother, Mom insisted even as paramedics pounded on the front door. I ran to let them in, then led them back to the dining room where Dad was still unconscious. As the paramedics took over his care, I stood back and watched Mom continue to glare at me like I was personally responsible for Dad's heart attack. Ma'am. One of the paramedics addressed Mom. What was your husband doing when he collapsed? Mom hesitated, glancing at me with venomous eyes. We were having a family discussion. It became heated. Any history of heart problems? High blood pressure, Mom admitted, but it's been controlled with medication. Has he been under any unusual stress lately? Another pause, another glance in my direction. Yes, significant family stress. The paramedic looked between Mom and me, clearly sensing tension. We need to transport him to the hospital immediately. Are you riding with us? Of course, Mom said quickly. As they loaded Dad onto a stretcher, Mom moved close to me and spoke in a low, angry voice that the paramedics couldn't hear. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed. "I hope destroying Derek was worth killing your father." I stared at her in disbelief. "Mom, Derek destroyed himself. Dad is having a heart attack because the stress of covering up Derek's crimes for years finally caught up with him. He was fine until you started digging up ancient history and airing our family's dirty laundry in public." "Ancient history," I repeated incredulously. "Derek has been stealing from me for 2 years. He embezzled money as recently as last month. This isn't ancient history, it's ongoing criminal activity." Mom's face was twisted with anger and grief. "You're destroying everything, Elena. Our family, our reputation, our future. And for what money revenge? What was so important that it was worth tearing apart everything we've built together?" I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had fed me and clothed me and helped me with homework for 18 years. This woman who had also spent those same years dismissing my achievements and favoring Derek at every opportunity. This woman who was now blaming me for the natural consequences of Derek's criminal choices. What was so important? I repeated her question. My financial future, my credit rating, my inheritance from the grandmother who actually loved me unconditionally. My right to be treated as an equal member of this family instead of Derek's inferior backup option. "You were never his backup option," Mom protested. "Really, because 3 hours ago you told me I was a nobody who didn't matter. You said Derek was going places while I was just going through the motions. You've spent my entire life making it clear that Derek was the golden child, and I was the consolation prize." Mom's face flushed red. "I never said you were a consolation prize." "You didn't have to say it. You showed it every single day. Every achievement Derek made was celebrated while mine were dismissed. Every mistake Derek made was excused while mine were criticized. Every need Derek had was met while mine were ignored." The paramedics were wheeling Dad toward the ambulance now, and Mom turned to follow them. But she stopped at the front door and looked back at me one last time. "When your father dies from this stress," she said coldly, "I want you to remember that you chose revenge over family. You chose strangers over your own blood. You chose money over the man who raised you and loved you despite all your selfishness." And then she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the house where I'd grown up surrounded by the evidence of Derek's crimes and the wreckage of our family's foundations. I sank into a chair feeling emotionally drained and physically exhausted. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline of performing CPR, and my mind was reeling from Mom's accusations. Was she right? Was I responsible for Dad's heart attack? Had I pushed this family crisis too far too fast? But then I looked at the papers still scattered across the dining room table, the evidence of Derek's embezzlement, the records of my stolen inheritance, the credit reports showing how Derek had systematically destroyed my financial future while our parents helped him do it. No, I wasn't responsible for this crisis. Derek was responsible. Derek and his choices and his crimes and his lies. I was just the accountant who'd finally added up all the numbers and presented the total to a family that preferred to live in denial. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed Derek's number. Elena. Derek's voice was small and frightened. "I just got a call from Mom. She said Dad had a heart attack. He collapsed about an hour ago. They took him to the hospital. Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know. The paramedics said his vital signs were stable, but he was unconscious when they transported him." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "Mom said it was because of tonight, because of everything that came out about my situation." Derek Dad's been under enormous stress for years. The stress of covering up your crimes, enabling your lifestyle, lying to me about my inheritance. Tonight was just the breaking point. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Derek said, his voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," I said tiredly, "and now we all have to deal with the consequences." "Elena, I know you probably hate me right now, but I need to ask you something. The FBI agent you spoke to, Agent Coleman, she wants me to cooperate with their investigation, to provide information about the other people involved in the fraud network. And if I cooperate, she said they might reduce my charges. Instead of 20 years, I might only get 5 or 6 years in prison. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this conversation. Derek, I can't make that decision for you. But you know about this stuff. You understand how the legal system works. Should I cooperate? Should I turn in the other people in the network? That's between you and your attorney. I can't afford an attorney, Derek said miserably. Not a good one anyway. Mom and Dad's savings are tied up in the house and my assets are all frozen pending the investigation. Then you'll get a public defender. A public defender isn't going to fight for me the way a private attorney would. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, wondering how many more impossible conversations this night was going to require. Derek, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you not to meet with the FBI tomorrow. I'm asking you to give me time to figure out a deal with prosecutors before you hand over all your evidence. You want me to obstruct a federal investigation. I want you to help your brother avoid spending the next 20 years in prison. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where we'd both grown up, where Derek had learned to ride his bike and I'd learned to solve math problems, where we'd played together as children before life and lies and criminal choices had driven us to this moment. Derek, I said quietly, you stopped being my brother the moment you opened credit cards in my name. You stopped being my brother when you stole my inheritance. You stopped being my brother when you sat at this dinner table and told me I didn't matter. I was wrong, Derek said desperately. I was completely wrong about everything. You do matter. You matter more than anyone in this family because you're the only one who's been honest. It's too late for that realization. It doesn't have to be. We're still family, Elena. We can still fix this. I laughed bitterly. Fix this, Derek. You've committed federal crimes. You've destroyed my credit. You've stolen from multiple employers. You've lied to everyone who's ever trusted you. There's no fixing this. There could be if I'd just what? Become complicit in your crimes, help you obstruct justice. Sacrifice my own future to protect someone who's spent years systematically destroying it. Derek was crying now. I could hear it in his voice, the sound of a man who'd finally realized that his choices had consequences he couldn't charm or lie his way out of. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry, Elena. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, I said again. And tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Agent Coleman to turn over all the evidence I've collected, because that's what honest people do when they discover crimes. They report them to the authorities. I hung up before Derek could respond, then turned off my phone entirely. I'd had enough conversations for one night, enough revelations and accusations and desperate pleas. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new consequences for Derek's choices. But tonight I was going home to my own apartment away from the family that had spent years making me feel like I didn't matter. Tonight, I was going to be alone with the satisfaction of knowing that I'd finally stood up for myself regardless of the cost. Even if that cost included watching the family I'd grown up with tear itself apart around the dinner table, where we'd once been happy. I arrived at the hospital the next morning with coffee and a folder full of documents for Agent Coleman, who had agreed to meet me there before Dad's visiting hours began. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. Agent Coleman was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversation. Professional, direct, and intimidating in the way that federal law enforcement officers tend to be. She was in her 40s with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Ms. Morrison, thank you for meeting me here. How is your father? Stable, according to the nurses. He had a minor heart attack brought on by stress. They're keeping him for observation, but the doctor thinks he'll make a full recovery. Good to hear. I understand last night was eventful. I handed her the folder containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. Everything's in there. Bank statements showing Derek's embezzlement, credit reports documenting the identity theft, records of my stolen inheritance, documentation of the fake vendor schemes. Agent Coleman flipped through the papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen thousands of similar cases. "This is excellent work, Ms. Morrison. Thorough, well-organized, properly documented. You'd make a good federal investigator." "Thank you. I just want to see justice done." "About that." Agent Coleman closed the folder and looked at me seriously. "Your brother contacted our office this morning. He wants to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence." I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Derek was finally willing to face the consequences of his actions, and sadness that it had taken the threat of 20 years in prison to get him there. What kind of cooperation? Full disclosure of the fraud network's operations, names, methods, financial details, communication records, everything he knows about how this organization recruited members and coordinated their activities. And in exchange, depending on the value of his information, we might recommend a sentence in the 5 to 8 year range instead of 15 to 20. 5 to 8 years. Derek would still lose most of his 30s to federal prison, but he'd have a chance at rebuilding his life when he got out. It was more mercy than he probably deserved, but it was something. "Agent Coleman, there's something else you should know. My parents may have been more involved in Derek's activities than they initially let on." Agent Coleman opened a notepad and clicked her pen. "How so?" "My mother provided Derek with my personal information that he used for the identity theft. She claims she thought it was for a legitimate insurance policy, but the timing suggests she knew or should have known what Derek was really doing with it." "We'll look into that. Accessory charges are possible if we can prove willful participation." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of Dad's room. Raised voices, the sound of someone shouting medical equipment, beeping urgently. Agent Coleman and I hurried down the hallway to see what was happening. We found Dad sitting up in his hospital bed, very much awake and apparently very angry about something. Mom was standing beside his bed with tears streaming down her face, and a nurse was trying to calm everyone down. "I don't want to hear another word about protecting Derek." Dad was saying, his voice hoarse but determined. "Not another word, Dorothy. I'm done." "Mr. Morrison," the nurse said firmly, "you need to keep your blood pressure down. This kind of stress isn't good for your recovery." "You know what isn't good for my recovery?" Dad shot back. 30 years of lies, 30 years of enabling, 30 years of watching my wife destroy one child while spoiling another. Mom looked up and saw me standing in the doorway with Agent Coleman. Her face went pale. "Harold, we have company." Dad followed her gaze and nodded when he saw me. "Good. Elena, come in here. I have some things to say and I want you to hear them." I approached his bedside cautiously. Dad looked older than he had yesterday, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. Like the heart attack had burned away some fog that had been clouding his judgment. "Dad, you should rest. We can talk about family stuff later." "No," Dad said firmly. "We're talking about it now while I've got the courage and the clarity to say what needs to be said." He turned to Mom, his expression sadder than I'd ever seen it. "Dorothy, I've been planning to divorce you for 3 years." Mom made a choking sound. "What?" "I've consulted with attorneys. I've documented your emotional abuse of Elena. I've saved recordings of conversations where you dismissed her accomplishments and praised Derek for things he didn't earn. I've been building a case against you for years." "Harold, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. The only reason I stayed this long was to protect Elena from having you gain more control over family finances through a divorce settlement. But she doesn't need my protection anymore. She's proven she can protect herself." Dad looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen directed my way. Pride. Genuine, uncomplicated pride in something I'd accomplished. "I watched you handle last night's crisis," he continued. "I watched you perform CPR when I collapsed. I watched you stand up to 30 years of family dysfunction and refuse to back down. You're the strongest person in this family. Alina and I should have recognized that years ago. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I need to apologize for 30 years of being too weak to stand up to your mother's favoritism. I need to apologize for enabling Derek's irresponsibility and allowing him to steal from you. I need to apologize for being a coward who chose peace over justice. Mom was crying again, but these tears looked different. Desperate, terrified. Harold, please, don't do this. We can work through our problems. We can fix this family. Fix it. Dad's voice was incredulous. Dorothy, you helped Derek steal Elena's identity. You enabled him to embezzle money from his employer. You've spent years emotionally abusing the child who's actually been responsible and honest, while praising the one who's been lying and stealing. Derek needed our support, Mom protested. Derek needed boundaries and consequences. What he got instead was enablement and excuses. And now he's facing 20 years in federal prison because we taught him that his actions didn't have consequences. Agent Coleman cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should give you folks some privacy for this conversation. No, Dad said quickly. Agent Coleman, you should hear this, because I have information that might be relevant to your investigation. Agent Coleman pulled out her notepad again. Dorothy knew about Derek's embezzlement, Dad said. Not the details, maybe, but she knew he was getting money from somewhere that didn't match his legitimate income. When Derek bought that house 2 years ago, I asked her how he could afford it on his salary. She said he'd told her about some consulting work he was doing on the side. Mom's face was white as paper. Harold, that's not fair. Isn't it when Derek started wearing expensive clothes and driving luxury cars, did you ask where the money was coming from? When he suddenly had cash for vacations and jewelry and restaurant meals that should have been beyond his budget, were you curious about his income sources? Mom didn't answer, which was answer enough. She knew, Dad continued. Maybe not the specific crimes, but she knew Derek was living beyond his means, and she chose not to ask uncomfortable questions because she didn't want to know the truth. Agent Coleman was writing rapidly. Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to make a formal statement about your wife's knowledge of Derek's activities? Absolutely, and I'll provide the recordings I've made of her conversations about Derek's financial situation and her treatment of Alina. You recorded me? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I recorded family conversations for 3 years, building evidence for divorce proceedings. I have dozens of hours of documentation showing your pattern of emotional abuse toward Alina and your suspicious ignorance about Derek's income sources. Mom sank into the visitor's chair like her legs wouldn't hold her up anymore. You're destroying our family, Harold. After 35 years of marriage, you're choosing to destroy everything we've built together. I'm not destroying anything, Dad said quietly. I'm finally admitting that it was already destroyed. Destroyed by years of lies and favoritism and enabling criminal behavior. I'm just finally being honest about what this family has become. He turned back to me, his expression softer. Elena, there's something else you should know. Your inheritance from Grandma Margaret wasn't the only money I've been hiding from you. What do you mean? I've been contributing to a college fund for you since you graduated high school. Money for advanced certifications, graduate school, whatever educational goals you might have. It's a separate account that Dorothy doesn't have access to. My eyes widened. How much money? $43,000. It was supposed to be a surprise for your 30th birthday, but given everything that's happened, I think you should know about it now. $43,000. Combined with recovering my stolen inheritance, that would be enough to pay off my student loans, fix my credit rating, and still have money left over for a down payment on a house. Dad, I don't know what to say. Say you'll forgive a foolish old man for taking 30 years to find his backbone, Dad replied. Say you'll accept my apology for letting Derek and your mother treat you like you didn't matter when you've been the best thing about this family since the day you were born. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. For the first time in my adult life, my father was treating me like his daughter instead of Derek's sister. For the first time ever, he was choosing me over family peace. "I forgive you," I said simply. Agent Coleman closed her notepad and looked around the room. "It seems like you folks have a lot to work through. Ms. Morrison, when you're ready, I'd like to schedule a formal interview to go over your evidence in detail." "I'm ready now," I said, because I was. I was ready to move forward with my life with or without the family that had spent years making me feel like I didn't deserve better. As Agent Coleman and I prepared to leave for the FBI field office, Dad called out to me one last time. "Elena, your mother was wrong about everything, but she was especially wrong about one thing. You don't just matter. You're the person this family should have been built around from the beginning." For the first time in my adult life, I felt like someone in my family actually saw me, actually valued me, actually understood that I was worth protecting and defending and celebrating. It had taken a criminal investigation and a heart attack to get there, but it was something. The FBI field office was exactly what I'd expected from watching crime shows. Sterile, efficient, and filled with people who looked like they could solve complex puzzles while drinking coffee and eating donuts. Agent Coleman led me to a conference room where 2 other agents were waiting with laptops, recording equipment, and stacks of files that suggested Derek's case was already much bigger than I'd realized. "Ms. Morrison, this is Agent Frank Martinez from our White Collar Crime Division and Agent Sarah Chen from our Computer Fraud Task Force. We understand you have extensive documentation of your brother's activities." I spread my evidence across the conference table while Agent Martinez set up a digital recorder. Everything's organized chronologically: bank statements, credit reports, vendor payment records, inheritance documentation, identity theft evidence. Agent Chen was already pulling up files on her laptop. "Ms. Morrison, your brother's case intersects with a federal investigation we've been conducting for 18 months. The fraud network he's connected to operates across 7 states and has stolen approximately $2.4 million from corporate employers." $2.4 million. The scope of Derek's criminal association was staggering. "How does Derek fit into the larger organization?" I asked. "Based on our surveillance and financial analysis, he appears to be a mid-level participant," Agent Martinez explained. "Not a leader, but not a newcomer either. He's been active in the network for approximately 4 years, which matches the timeline of his embezzlement activities." Agent Coleman pulled out a thick file and opened it on the table. "Here's what we know about the network's operations. They recruit new members through online forums that supposedly discuss alternative income strategies and creative financial solutions. In reality, they're sharing techniques for embezzlement, identity theft, and corporate fraud. They have training materials," Agent Chen added, turning her laptop screen toward me. "Step-by-step guides for creating fake vendor companies, manipulating expense reports, and avoiding detection by corporate auditing systems." I stared at the screen, which showed a detailed tutorial titled "Building Sustainable Revenue Streams Through B2B Relationship Management." It sounded like legitimate business advice until you read the fine print and realized it was instructions for stealing money from your employer. "Derek learned these techniques from this network?" I asked. "Almost certainly. The vendor payment scheme he used at Morrison Industries matches their standard template exactly. Same naming conventions for fake companies, same banking structures, same transaction patterns." Agent Martinez pulled out another file. "But here's what makes your brother's situation unique, Ms. Morrison. Most network members operate alone, stealing from their own employers. Derek expanded beyond the network's typical model." "How so?" "The identity theft involving your personal information. That's not part of their standard playbook. Derek improvised that scheme on his own, which suggests either desperation or growing confidence in his criminal abilities. Or both, I thought. Derek had probably started with the network's basic embezzlement template, then escalated to more serious crimes when his debts outpaced his stealing ability. There's something else," Agent Chen said, pulling up another screen. "We've been monitoring the network's communications for 6 months. Derek has been recruiting new members." My stomach dropped. "Recruiting?" He brought at least 3 new people into the organization, former co-workers from previous jobs who were struggling financially. He taught them the network's techniques and helped them set up their own embezzlement schemes. So Derek wasn't just a thief, he was actively spreading criminal techniques to other people, multiplying the damage and creating new victims. The brother who'd grown up playing video games with me had become someone who taught other people how to commit federal crimes. Agent Coleman opened her notepad again. Ms. Morrison, your documentation of Derek's activities is exceptionally thorough. Combined with the network intelligence we've gathered, we have enough evidence to file charges against him and approximately 20 other network members. What kind of charges? Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, and in Derek's case, identity theft. The racketeering charge is particularly significant because it allows us to prosecute the network as an ongoing criminal enterprise. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Here's where your cooperation becomes crucial, Ms. Morrison. Your inside knowledge of Derek's methods combined with your forensic accounting skills could help us trace financial flows throughout the entire network. You want me to help investigate other people Derek recruited? We want to offer you a consulting contract, Agent Coleman said. 6 months, $60,000 working with our forensic accounting team to unravel the financial structures of this criminal organization. $60,000. That would replace the inheritance Derek had stolen and provide enough money to rebuild my financial life completely. It would also give me the opportunity to work on exactly the kind of high-profile fraud case that could launch a forensic accounting career. What would my role be specifically? Analyzing financial records, identifying patterns of fraudulent transactions, tracing money flows between network members and their victims. Agent Chen explained, the kind of detailed financial investigation that led you to uncover Derek's crimes in the first place. And Derek, what happens to him if I accept this position? Agent Martinez consulted his notes. That depends on his level of cooperation. If he provides complete information about the network's operations and helps us build cases against other members, we'd recommend a sentence in the 5 to 8 year range. And if he doesn't cooperate, federal sentencing guidelines for his charges would likely result in 15 to 20 years. I thought about Derek probably sitting in a holding cell or a cheap motel room somewhere contemplating the destruction of his entire life. Despite everything he'd done to me, despite all the lies and theft and manipulation, he was still the person who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework. But he was also the person who'd stolen my identity and destroyed my credit rating. He was the person who'd recruited other people into criminal activity. He was the person who'd looked me in the eye last night and told me I didn't matter. I'll take the consulting position, I said. Agent Coleman smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Excellent. Ms. Morrison, your work on this case could result in the largest takedown of a financial fraud network in this district's history. When do I start? Immediately. We have search warrants being executed this morning at 17 locations across 4 states. By tonight, we'll have arrested most of the network's leadership and seized their financial records. Agent Chen was typing rapidly on her laptop. Ms. Morrison, you should know that your brother's arrest will likely happen this afternoon. Given his cooperation offer, he'll probably be released on bond pending trial, but his assets will remain frozen and he'll be restricted to his home county. What about my parents? Agent Martinez consulted another file. Your father's statement about your mother's knowledge of Derek's activities is helpful, but we need more evidence to file charges against her. If she was genuinely ignorant about the specifics of Derek's crimes, she'll probably face civil liability, but not criminal charges. And if she wasn't ignorant, accessory charges are possible. Conspiracy charges if we can prove active participation. I thought about Mom sitting in Dad's hospital room watching 35 years of marriage dissolve around her. She'd made terrible choices, enabled destructive behavior, and participated in stealing my inheritance. But unlike Derek, she hadn't recruited other people into criminal activity or systematically destroyed someone's financial future for personal gain. Agent Coleman, when Derek's arrested today, will there be media coverage? Probably, Financial fraud networks generate significant public interest, especially when the amounts involved are this large. So by tonight, Derek's arrest would likely be on the local news. Our family's dysfunction would become public knowledge. Everyone in our hometown would know that the successful sales manager they'd envied was actually a federal criminal. Ms. Morrison. Agent Chen said, "There's one more thing you should know. Your evidence against Derek led us to identify a pattern in his communication records. We believe he was planning to flee the country." Flee. Agent Martinez nodded grimly. Credit card records show attempted purchases of airline tickets to countries without extradition treaties. The purchases were declined because his cards were maxed out, but the intent was clear. Derek hadn't just been planning to destroy my financial future. He'd been planning to escape consequences entirely, leaving me to deal with the aftermath of his identity theft while he started a new life, somewhere beyond the reach of federal prosecutors. "He tried to buy plane tickets yesterday," I asked. "This morning, about 2 hours after you spoke with him on the phone." So while Derek had been crying and apologizing and begging me not to cooperate with federal investigators, he'd been simultaneously trying to book flights to countries that wouldn't send him back to face justice. The brother who'd claimed he never meant to hurt anyone had been planning to hurt me one final time by escaping accountability for his crimes. Any lingering sympathy I might have felt for Derek evaporated in that moment. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was only sorry he'd been caught. And given the opportunity, he would have disappeared forever rather than face the consequences of destroying my life. Agents. I said, I want to do everything possible to make sure Derek and everyone else in this network faces appropriate consequences for their crimes. "We were hoping you'd say that," Agent Coleman replied, "because we're about to give you the opportunity to help bring down one of the largest financial fraud operations in federal law enforcement history." As I signed consulting contracts and confidentiality agreements, I realized that Derek's crimes had inadvertently given me exactly the career opportunity I'd been working toward for years. His attempts to destroy my financial future had instead launched me into the kind of high-profile forensic accounting work that would establish my professional reputation permanently. Sometimes justice comes in forms you don't expect. 3 days later, I was settling into my new role as a federal consulting forensic accountant when Agent Coleman called with urgent news that made my blood run cold. "Ms. Morrison, we have a problem. Derek has disappeared." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He was supposed to report to our office this morning for his cooperation interview. When he didn't show up, we sent agents to his apartment. The door was standing open, his belongings were scattered everywhere, and there were signs of hasty packing." My mind raced through the implications. "Do you think he ran—" "We're investigating multiple possibilities. Flight kidnapping by network associates who don't want him to cooperate or something worse." "Something worse?" Agent Coleman's voice was grim. "Ms. Morrison, financial fraud networks don't appreciate members who cooperate with federal investigations. Derek's offer to provide information about other network participants may have put him in significant danger." I sank into my desk chair at the FBI field office, staring at the financial records I'd been analyzing for the past 3 days. "Have you checked airports, bus stations, train stations?" "All monitored. His passport was flagged yesterday, so he can't leave the country legally. But Ms. Morrison, there's something else. We discovered Derek's been in contact with your cousin Jennifer." Jennifer, Mom's sister's daughter who lived about 2 hours away in Columbus. She'd always been close to Derek, probably because she was as charmed by his surface personality as everyone else used to be. "What kind of contact?" "Phone calls, text messages, social media communications. The last contact was yesterday evening about 6 hours before Derek was supposed to report to us." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Jennifer's number as if Agent Coleman's words had somehow summoned her. "Agent Coleman, Jennifer's calling me right now." "Answer it. Put it on speakerphone." I accepted the call and switched to speaker mode. "Hey, Jennifer." "Elena." Jennifer's voice sounded strained nervous. "I'm so glad you answered. I need to ask you something important." "What's going on?" It's about Derek. He called me last night really upset about some legal trouble he's having, something about problems at work. I exchanged glances with Agent Coleman, who was listening intently and taking notes. "What kind of problems?" I asked carefully. He wasn't very specific, but he said he might need to lay low for a while until things blow over. He asked if I could help him with some travel arrangements. Travel arrangements? He wanted me to buy him a bus ticket to somewhere in Mexico. He said he couldn't use his own credit cards because his company was monitoring his finances as part of some investigation. Agent Coleman was writing rapidly and making urgent hand gestures at other agents in the room. "Jennifer, did you buy him a ticket?" "That's what I wanted to ask you about." Derek made it sound like this was just some misunderstanding that would get cleared up in a few weeks, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. He was too scared, too desperate. That's not the Derek I know. "What exactly did he say?" "He said you'd been helping some investigators look into his work situation and that the investigation had gotten out of control. He said you probably didn't realize how serious the consequences could be for him." I felt anger surge through me. Even while fleeing from federal charges, Derek was still trying to manipulate family members by portraying himself as a victim of my vindictiveness. Jennifer Derek is under federal investigation for embezzling money from his employer. He's also been stealing my identity for 2 years and destroyed my credit rating. The consequences he's facing are the natural result of his own criminal choices. Criminal charges. Jennifer's voice went up several octaves. "Alina, he made it sound like this was just an accounting error or a misunderstanding about expense reports. It's wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. He could go to prison for 20 years if he doesn't cooperate with federal investigators." Oh my God, I almost helped him flee the country." Agent Coleman leaned toward the phone. "Ms. Patterson, this is Special Agent Coleman with the FBI. Did Derek Morrison ask you to purchase any travel documents or assist with any other activities that might help him avoid law enforcement?" "FBI," Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper now. "Your FBI." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Morrison was scheduled to meet with federal investigators this morning as part of a cooperation agreement. His failure to appear constitutes a federal crime in itself." "He didn't tell me any of this. He said it was just some workplace investigation that had gotten blown out of proportion." Agent Coleman made more notes. "Ms. Patterson, when was the last time you spoke with Derek?" "Last night, around 11 o'clock. He called from a number I didn't recognize, said his phone was having problems. He sounded really scared and kept asking if I thought Alina was trying to destroy him." I closed my eyes, feeling frustrated and sad. Even in the midst of fleeing from federal charges, Derek was still obsessing over our family dynamics instead of taking responsibility for his own actions. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that you've always been the most honest person in our family, and that if you were helping investigators, there must be a good reason for it." How did he respond to that? He got really angry. Started ranting about how you'd always been jealous of his success and how you were using this investigation to get revenge for childhood grievances. Agent Coleman was making urgent signals to other agents who were apparently coordinating some kind of search effort based on this new information. "Ms. Patterson." Agent Coleman said, "We need to know Derek's exact location. Any information you can provide could help us resolve this situation safely. I don't know where he is now, but when he called last night, I could hear traffic in the background. Highway traffic, like he was near an interstate." "Did he mention any specific destinations? Any places he might be heading?" "He asked about bus routes to border towns. McAllen, Brownsville, places like that. But Agent Coleman, I swear I didn't help him with any travel arrangements. Something about the whole conversation felt wrong." "You did the right thing by not helping him," Agent Coleman assured her. "Ms. Patterson, if Derek contacts you again, it's crucial that you notify us immediately. He's now considered a federal fugitive, and anyone who assists him could face criminal charges." After Jennifer hung up, Agent Coleman turned to me with a serious expression. "Ms. Morrison, Derek's flight puts you in a potentially dangerous situation." What do you mean? Fugitives sometimes blame their legal problems on the people who expose their crimes. Derek has already demonstrated that he's willing to commit serious crimes when he feels desperate. We need to consider the possibility that he might try to retaliate against you. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think Derek would actually try to hurt me? I think Derek is a federal fugitive who's lost everything and has nothing left to lose. That makes him unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Agent Martinez approached our table with a laptop computer. Agent Coleman, we've got Derek's phone records and credit card activity for the past 24 hours. Agent Coleman studied the screen. He's been moving south, staying at cheap motels and paying with cash. The last credit card transaction was at a gas station outside Cincinnati about 18 hours ago. So he's probably in Kentucky or Tennessee by now, I said. If he's still moving toward the Mexican border, yes. But Ms. Morrison, there's something else in these records that concerns us. Agent Martinez pointed to a series of phone calls on Derek's record. He's been in contact with other network members, 3 different calls to known associates over the past 2 days. What does that mean? Agent Coleman's expression was grim. It could mean he's coordinating with other network members who are also trying to avoid arrest, or it could mean he's trying to arrange some kind of deal to protect himself from network retaliation. Network retaliation. Ms. Morrison, your brother's cooperation offer included providing information that would lead to the arrest of approximately 20 other people. If those people know Derek is planning to testify against them, they have strong incentives to prevent his cooperation. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Derek wasn't just fleeing from federal agents, he might be fleeing from his own criminal associates people who would consider him a threat to their freedom and possibly their lives. So Derek could be in danger from both law enforcement and criminals. Exactly, which is why we need to find him quickly before either situation escalates into something worse. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Mom's number. It's my mother, I told Agent Coleman. Answer it, she might have heard from Derek. I put the call on speakerphone. Mom. Elena, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. What's wrong? Derek called me an hour ago. He's in trouble, real trouble. He said federal agents are trying to arrest him for something he didn't do. I exchanged another look with Agent Coleman, who was shaking his head in frustration. Mom Derek missed a mandatory meeting with federal investigators this morning. He's now officially a fugitive. He said you would say something like that. He said you've been lying to investigators about him because you're angry about family issues. Even as a federal fugitive, Derek was still manipulating our mother and portraying himself as the victim of my vindictiveness. Mom, Derek has been embezzling money from his employer for 4 years. He's been stealing my identity for 2 years. He's been lying to this family about everything from his income to his background. None of this is about family grudges or personal revenge. He said he can prove his innocence if he just has time to gather the right documents. Agent Coleman leaned toward the phone. Mrs. Morrison, this is Special Agent Coleman with the FBI. Your son is a federal fugitive who's facing charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. There are no documents that will prove his innocence because we have overwhelming evidence of his guilt. FBI, Mom's voice cracked. Elena, what have you done? I've helped federal investigators uncover a multi-million-dollar fraud network, I said firmly. I've done what any responsible citizen would do when they discover evidence of federal crimes. But Derek is your brother. Derek is a criminal who's been systematically destroying my financial future for 2 years while lying to everyone in this family. Mom was crying now, but these weren't tears of grief or shock. These were tears of angry desperation. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Coleman said, if Derek contacts you again, you need to convince him to surrender voluntarily. Every day he remains a fugitive makes his legal situation worse and puts him in greater physical danger. Physical danger. Federal fugitives are often subject to violence from their criminal associates. Derek's best chance of survival is surrendering to federal authorities. After Mom hung up, I sat in stunned silence trying to process the fact that my brother was now a federal fugitive who might be in danger from both law enforcement and criminals. Ms. Morrison. Agent Coleman said quietly, "I want you to understand something. This investigation is no longer just about recovering stolen money or prosecuting financial crimes. Your brother's flight has escalated this into a manhunt involving multiple federal agencies. What happens when you find him? That depends on the circumstances. If he surrenders voluntarily, his cooperation offer might still be available. If he resists arrest, or if other network members are involved, the situation could become much more dangerous." I looked around the FBI field office at the agents coordinating search efforts and monitoring communication networks, all because of crimes that Derek had committed and choices that Derek had made. 6 months ago, he'd been the golden child who could do no wrong. Now he was a federal fugitive whose arrest would probably make national news. "Agent Coleman, is there anything I can do to help find Derek before this situation gets worse?" "Actually, yes. We're going to need you to make a phone call." Agent Coleman's plan was simple but risky. Using my phone and a sophisticated recording system, I would call Derek and try to convince him to surrender voluntarily, while federal agents trace the call to determine his location. The key is keeping him on the line long enough for us to triangulate his position, Agent Martinez explained as technicians attached monitoring equipment to my phone. At least 3 minutes, preferably 5 or more. And if he realizes what I'm doing, then he'll hang up and probably ditch his current phone, making him much harder to track, Agent Coleman admitted. "But Ms. Morrison, this may be our best chance to resolve the situation without violence." I took a deep breath and dialed Derek's number, my hands shaking slightly as the phone began to ring. "Elena." Derek's voice sounded exhausted and paranoid. "How did you get this number?" "Derek, everyone's looking for you. The FBI, your criminal associates, probably bounty hunters by now. You need to surrender before someone gets hurt." "I can't surrender. You don't understand what you've started. These people don't just go to prison quietly." "What people, Derek? What are you talking about?" "The network, the organization I was working with. They know I was planning to cooperate with federal investigators, and they've made it very clear that cooperation isn't an option." Agent Coleman was watching the tracing equipment, intently making urgent gestures for me to keep Derek talking. "Derek, where are you right now?" "I can't tell you that. I can't trust anyone anymore, not even family." "You can trust me. Despite everything you've done, I don't want to see you get hurt." Derek laughed bitterly. "Right. That's why you're working with the FBI to build a case against me." "I'm working with the FBI to build a case against a criminal network that's stolen millions of dollars. You just happen to be part of that network." "I never meant for any of this to happen, Elena. It started so small. Just a few $100s here and there to cover bills. But then it grew, and I couldn't stop, and now I'm trapped." Agent Coleman was nodding and making keep-going motions with her hands. "Derek, you're not trapped. You can still cooperate with investigators. You can still make a deal that reduces your sentence and protects you from network retaliation." "It's too late for that. I've already been marked as a traitor. Yesterday morning, 2 men showed up at my apartment asking questions about my cooperation plans." My blood went cold. What kind of men? The kind who don't ask questions politely, the kind who make it clear that snitching has consequences. So Derek wasn't just fleeing from federal agents, he was fleeing from criminals who wanted to silence him permanently. "Derek, that's all the more reason to surrender to federal authorities. They can protect you from network retaliation. They can put you in witness protection if necessary." "Witness protection!" Derek's voice cracked. "Elena, do you have any idea what that means? New identity, new location, no contact with family ever again. My entire life would be erased." "Your entire life is already erased," I said bluntly. "The question is whether you're going to spend the next 20 years in prison or the next 5 years, and whether you're going to survive long enough to serve either sentence." Agent Martinez was frantically working his computer, apparently getting location data from the phone trace. Derek, I need to tell you something. Mom and Dad know about everything now. The embezzlement, the identity theft, the fake inheritance story. Dad's filing for divorce from Mom, and he's been planning it for years because of how she treated me. What? Dad's been recording Mom's conversations for 3 years, documenting her emotional abuse and her suspicious ignorance about your income sources. He's going to testify about Mom's knowledge of your criminal activities. Derek was quiet for a long moment. So the whole family is falling apart. The family fell apart years ago, Derek. We just finally stopped pretending everything was fine. I ruined everything, didn't I? You made choices. Those choices had consequences. But Derek, you can still make better choices. You can still cooperate with investigators and help them shut down this network before more people get hurt. Agent Coleman held up a piece of paper with coordinates and an address. They'd found him. Derek, where exactly are you right now? Why do you want to know? Because I want federal agents to get to you before your criminal friends do. Another long pause. I'm at a truck stop outside Nashville. I've been hiding here for 2 days trying to figure out what to do next. Agent Coleman was already coordinating with other agents arranging for local law enforcement to surround the truck stop without spooking Derek. Derek, I want you to walk outside that truck stop and wait for federal agents to arrive. Keep your hands visible and don't make any sudden movements. You're having me arrested right now, aren't you? I'm having you rescued right now. There's a difference. Elena, I need you to know something. The identity theft, the credit cards, the stolen inheritance. I never meant for any of that to hurt you specifically. I was desperate, and I made terrible choices, but I never wanted to destroy your life. But you did destroy parts of my life, Derek, and you would have destroyed more of it if I hadn't discovered what you were doing. I know, and I hate myself for it. But Elena, please believe me when I say that I never meant to hurt the one person in this family who actually deserved better. I could hear sirens in the background of Derek's call getting louder as federal agents approached the truck stop. Derek, can you hear the sirens? Yeah. Those are federal agents coming to arrest you, but they're also coming to protect you from the people who want to hurt you for cooperating. Walk outside with your hands up, and this nightmare can finally start to end. What happens to me now? That depends on how much help you can provide to investigators. But Derek, whatever happens, it's better than spending the rest of your life running from both law enforcement and criminals. The line went quiet except for the sound of sirens getting closer. Elena. Yeah. I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I know you're sorry, Derek. Now prove it by helping federal investigators shut down this network so other people don't get hurt the way I did. Okay, I'm going outside now. The call disconnected as Derek surrendered to federal agents at a truck stop 300 miles from home. Agent Coleman immediately called the arresting team to confirm that Derek was in custody and unharmed. He's safe, she told me after hanging up. No injuries, no resistance. He'll be transported back here for processing and his cooperation interview. I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and closure. Derek was finally going to face consequences for his actions, but he was also finally safe from the criminal network that had threatened his life. What happens next? Derek will be formally charged and arraigned probably tomorrow. If his cooperation is valuable enough, prosecutors will recommend a reduced sentence. If not, he'll face the full weight of federal sentencing guidelines. And the network? Agent Martinez looked up from his computer with a satisfied expression. Derek's arrest was the final piece we needed. We now have sufficient evidence to arrest all 23 known network members across 7 states. The coordinated takedown starts in 2 hours. 23 arrests, 7 states, a multi-million-dollar criminal network dismantled because Derek's desperation had finally driven him to make one honest choice. Ms. Morrison. Agent Coleman said, "Your brother's information is going to help us recover stolen funds for dozens of victims and prevent future crimes by shutting down this entire organization." So some good comes out of this disaster. A lot of good. Your forensic accounting work, combined with Derek's cooperation, is going to result in one of the largest financial fraud prosecutions in this district's history. As federal agents coordinated the massive arrest operation, I sat in the FBI conference room thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in less than a week. 7 days ago, I was the family disappointment whose achievements didn't matter. Now I was a federal consultant whose work was helping dismantle criminal organizations. 7 days ago, Derek was the golden child whose success everyone admired. Now he was a federal prisoner whose cooperation might be the only thing that saved him from spending most of his remaining life behind bars. 7 days ago, our family was built on lies and favoritism and denial. Now it was fractured, but finally honest about what we'd become. Ms. Morrison. Agent Coleman said, "There's something else you should know. Derek's arrest is going to generate significant media attention. Financial fraud networks are big news, especially when they involve this much money and this many victims. So our family's destruction would be public. Everyone in our hometown would know that the successful Morrison family they'd envied was actually built on lies and federal crimes. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Agent Coleman, I've spent 30 years being dismissed as unimportant by people who mattered to me. I think I can handle being noticed by people who don't. 2 hours later, the coordinated takedown began. FBI agents in 7 states simultaneously arrested 23 members of the financial fraud network that Derek had helped expose. The seizure of criminal assets would ultimately recover over $2 million for victims of their schemes. Derek's cooperation had finally accomplished something genuinely positive, even though it had taken federal charges and criminal threats to motivate his honesty. Sometimes justice comes in forms you don't expect, but it still comes. 2 weeks after Derek's arrest, I was sitting in the executive conference room of Morrison Industries, meeting with the company's board of directors about my role in uncovering their massive fraud problem. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Derek's crimes had ultimately led to my being recognized as the expert who'd helped save the company from financial disaster. Ms. Morrison said, "CEO Barbara Chen, your forensic analysis has been invaluable to our recovery efforts. Not only did you identify the fraudulent vendor schemes, but your documentation helped our insurance company process claims and our legal team pursue civil recoveries." Around the conference table sat the executives whose company Derek had been systematically robbing for 4 years. They were looking at me with the kind of respect and appreciation I'd never received from my own family. "We've recovered approximately 60% of the stolen funds through asset seizures and insurance claims," continued CFO Thomas Williams. "That recovery wouldn't have been possible without your meticulous documentation of the fraud schemes." But the real surprise came when Barbara Chen opened a leather portfolio and pulled out an official document. "Ms. Morrison, the board has voted to offer you a permanent position as our Director of Financial Compliance and Fraud Prevention. The salary is $120,000 annually, plus bonuses based on fraud prevention and detection." $120,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, doing exactly the kind of work I'd always wanted to do. Derek's crimes hadn't just launched my career, they'd catapulted me into a position I might not have reached for another decade. The position would involve developing fraud prevention protocols, training our audit staff, and consulting with other companies in our industry about financial security measures. Thomas Williams explained. "What about my current consulting work with the FBI?" "We've spoken with Agent Coleman," Barbara Chen said. "She's agreed to a joint arrangement where you'll continue your federal consulting work while leading our compliance department. It's an unusual arrangement, but your expertise is too valuable to lose." I accepted the position immediately. The combination of federal consulting fees and my new corporate salary would make me financially secure in ways I'd never thought possible. Derek's attempts to destroy my financial future had instead created opportunities that would establish my professional reputation permanently. But the most satisfying moment came later that afternoon when I received a call from my new assistant. "Ms. Morrison, there's a reporter from the Wall Street Journal on line 2. She wants to interview you about your role in exposing the Morrison Industries fraud network." The Wall Street Journal. The same newspaper that Derek used to read every morning, dreaming of being successful enough to merit their attention someday. Now they wanted to interview me about my role in bringing down the criminal network that Derek had been part of. "Ms. Morrison," the reporter asked when I picked up the call, "this is Rachel Stevens from the Wall Street Journal. I'm writing an article about the federal prosecution of the financial fraud network that stole over $2 million from corporate employers across 7 states. How can I help you?" "I understand that you were instrumental in uncovering this network's activities, despite having no law enforcement background. Can you tell me how an accountant from Ohio ended up helping the FBI dismantle a multi-state criminal organization?" I thought carefully about how to answer. The full story involved family dysfunction and personal betrayal that I wasn't ready to discuss with national media. I discovered irregularities in financial records that suggested fraudulent activity. As a CPA with forensic accounting training, I documented what I found and reported it to appropriate authorities. "But these weren't your employer's financial records, were they? I understand the fraudulent activity involved a family member. I'd prefer not to discuss personal family matters." "Of course. But Ms. Morrison, your work on this case has been described by federal investigators as exceptional. Agent Coleman told me that your documentation was more thorough than what they typically see from professional investigators. I was trained to pay attention to details and patterns. When I saw evidence of financial crimes, I treated it the same way I would any other forensic accounting assignment." "And now you're working as a federal consultant while also heading the compliance department at Morrison Industries, the company that was victimized by these crimes. That's quite a career development." "It's been an unexpected opportunity to use my skills in ways that help prevent other victims from experiencing similar financial crimes." After the interview, I sat in my new office overlooking downtown Cleveland, thinking about how completely my life had changed. The morning Derek had told me I didn't matter. I was just another accountant doing routine work for a mid-size firm. Now I was the director of financial compliance for a major corporation and a federal consultant whose work was being covered by national media. My phone rang again. This time it was Dad calling from his hospital room where he was recovering from heart surgery that had been postponed after his initial heart attack. "Elena, I saw the news article about your new job. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." "I also wanted to tell you that the divorce papers were filed yesterday. Your mother has agreed to a settlement that gives you full control of your inheritance from Grandma Margaret, plus interest and penalties for the unauthorized withdrawals. So I would finally receive the money that Grandma had specifically left for me, money that had been stolen to fund Derek's criminal lifestyle. There's something else," Dad continued. "The college fund I set up for you with compound interest over the past 10 years, it's grown to $57,000. Combined with my recovered inheritance and my new salary, I was looking at complete financial security for the first time in my adult life. Derek's crimes had inadvertently created the exact opposite of what he'd intended. Instead of destroying my financial future, his actions had launched me into prosperity. Dad, how are you handling everything? The divorce, Derek's arrest, the media attention. Honestly, I feel relieved. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. No more covering up lies, no more enabling destructive behavior, no more pretending our family was something it wasn't. What about Derek? Have you heard from him? He called yesterday from Federal Holding. He wanted me to know that his cooperation with investigators is going well. Agent Coleman thinks he'll probably get a sentence in the 6 to 8 year range instead of 20 years. 6 to 8 years. Derek would be in his late 30s when he got out of prison, old enough to potentially rebuild his life, but young enough to have meaningful decades ahead of him. How did he sound? Different. Humbled. Like he'd finally realized the scope of what he'd done and why it mattered. He asked me to tell you that he understands why you couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own choices. Dad, do you think Derek will actually learn from this experience? I don't know. But Elena, I've learned something important from watching this whole situation unfold. What's that? I learned that protecting people from the consequences of their bad choices isn't actually protection. It's enablement. And enablement doesn't help anyone grow or improve or become better people. We talked for another few minutes about practical matters, Dad's recovery timeline, the logistics of his divorce arrangements for selling the family house. But underneath the practical conversation was something I'd never heard from Dad before: genuine respect for my judgment and my capabilities. For the first time in my life, my father was treating me like an adult whose opinions mattered and whose achievements were worth celebrating. As I hung up, I realized that Derek's crimes had done more than just launch my career and establish my financial security. They'd also forced our family to finally be honest about our dynamics and our relationships. The honesty was painful, but it was also liberating. Later that evening, I received one more unexpected call. This one was from Beverly Morrison, my mother. "Elena, I need to speak with you." Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain than I'd ever heard it. "What about Mom?" "About apologizing. For 30 years of treating you like you didn't matter. For enabling Derek's behavior while dismissing your accomplishments. For stealing your inheritance and helping Derek steal your identity." I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unprecedented admission. "Mom, why are you calling me now?" "Because I've spent 2 weeks in therapy trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would hurt her own daughter to protect her criminal son. And I've realized that I owe you more than an apology. I owe you accountability." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm prepared to testify against Derek if prosecutors need additional evidence for his case. It means I'm prepared to face criminal charges myself if that's what justice requires. And it means I'm prepared to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the damage I've done to your life." For 30 years, I'd waited to hear my mother acknowledge that I mattered, that my achievements were worth celebrating, that I deserved to be treated with the same respect and consideration she'd always shown Derek. I'd never expected that acknowledgement to come in the form of an offer to face criminal prosecution. "Mom, I don't want you to go to prison." "I know you don't. But Elena, I need you to know that I'm finally prepared to face the consequences of my choices, just like Derek is facing the consequences of his." As I hung up, I realized that our family's destruction had also created opportunities for our family's rebuilding, not as the unit we'd been built on lies and favoritism and denial, but as individuals who could finally be honest about who we were and what we'd done. Sometimes justice includes opportunities for redemption, even when redemption comes at a terrible cost. 3 months after Derek's arrest, Dad was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health and a new perspective on life that he credited to finally living honestly for the first time in 30 years. His first stop after leaving the hospital wasn't home to the house he'd shared with Mom. It was to my new apartment to see how I was adjusting to my dramatically changed circumstances. "This place is beautiful," Dad said, looking around the downtown loft I'd been able to afford thanks to my new salary and consulting income. "You've always had good taste, but I don't think I ever really paid attention before." "Thanks, Dad. How are you feeling?" "Really feeling not just what you tell the doctors." Dad settled into my living room chair with a cup of coffee, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Honestly, I feel like I've been holding my breath for decades, and I can finally exhale." "What do you mean?" "Your mother's manipulation. Derek's lies, the constant financial stress of covering up problems instead of solving them. It was killing me slowly. The heart attack was just my body's way of saying it couldn't handle the dishonesty anymore." Dad pulled out a manila folder and set it on my coffee table. "I have something for you. The final paperwork on your inheritance recovery and the college fund distribution. Inside the folder were bank statements showing that all the money Derek and Mom had stolen from my inheritance had been recovered and deposited into an account under my sole control. With interest and penalties, the total came to $72,000. The college fund Dad had secretly maintained contained an additional $57,000. Dad, this is almost $130,000. It's what should have been yours all along, plus compensation for the damage Derek caused to your credit rating and financial reputation. But there was something else in the folder that surprised me even more. Legal documents transferring ownership of Grandma Margaret's house to me. Dad, I can't accept the house. It's not a gift, Dad explained. It's what your grandmother wanted. I found her original will in the safety deposit box. She specifically left the house to you, but your mother convinced me to keep it as family property until we decided what to do with it. Mom convinced you. Your mother has been manipulating family financial decisions for years, always in ways that benefited Derek and disadvantaged you. The house, your inheritance, even your college fund. She argued against all of it because she wanted Derek to have access to family resources. I looked at the property deed transferring ownership of Grandma's small house to me. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was in a good neighborhood and completely paid off. Between my new job, my consulting income, my recovered inheritance, and now a house with no mortgage, I was looking at financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Dad, why didn't you stop Mom from manipulating these decisions? Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup like it contained answers to questions he'd been asking himself for years. Because I was weak, he said finally. Because it was easier to go along with your mother's favoritism than to fight about it constantly. Because I told myself that Derek needed more help while you were naturally responsible and would be fine on your own. But I wasn't fine on my own. No, you weren't. You were struggling financially, working multiple jobs to pay off student loans that Derek never had because we paid for his education. You were building a career without family support while Derek got handed opportunities he didn't earn. And when your credit rating was destroyed by his identity theft, you dealt with it alone while we helped him buy a house he couldn't afford. Dad looked up from his coffee and met my eyes directly. Elena, I failed you as a father, not just recently, but for your entire adult life. I prioritized family peace over justice, and I let you pay the price for that choice. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to say this, and you need to hear it. You are the most capable, honest, and resilient person in this family. You always have been. The fact that it took a federal criminal investigation for me to recognize and acknowledge that is a failure I'll regret for the rest of my life. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. For 30 years, I'd waited to hear my father say that I was valuable, that my accomplishments mattered, that he was proud of the person I'd become. Hearing it now under these circumstances was both healing and heartbreaking. What happens now, Dad, with us, I mean? Now I spend whatever time I have left trying to be the father you deserved from the beginning. Now I support your decisions and celebrate your achievements and make sure you never doubt your worth again. And Derek, Dad's expression grew sadder. Derek is facing the consequences of his choices. I love him, but I'm done enabling him. If he learns from this experience and becomes a better person, I'll welcome him back into my life. If he doesn't learn, then the relationship we had was built on lies anyway. Have you talked to him? Once. He called from Federal Holding to apologize for the stress his actions caused my heart condition. But Elena, here's what's interesting. He spent most of the conversation talking about how his cooperation with investigators has helped him understand the scope of damage the fraud network was causing. What do you mean? Derek's testimony has helped prosecutors identify over 40 additional victims across multiple states, companies that lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, individuals whose identities were stolen, families who lost savings to investment scams connected to the network. He finally understands that this was never just about him stealing money. It was about him participating in an organization that destroyed people's lives. How is he handling that realization? Better than I expected. He's been participating in financial crimes victim impact programs, hearing directly from people who were hurt by network activities. According to his attorney, Derek has become one of the most cooperative and remorseful defendants federal prosecutors have worked with. Dad opened his folder again and pulled out a handwritten letter. He asked me to give you this. I recognized Derek's handwriting immediately. His penmanship had always been better than mine, another small advantage that had been praised while my strengths were overlooked. Elena. The letter began, I know a written apology can't undo years of lies and theft and manipulation, but I need you to know that federal prosecution has forced me to confront the full scope of what I did to you and why it was wrong. The letter went on for 3 pages detailing Derek's growing understanding of how his crimes had affected not just me, but dozens of other victims across multiple states. He wrote about participating in victim impact sessions where he'd heard from people whose lives had been destroyed by identity theft and embezzlement. The woman from Michigan whose credit was so damaged by network identity theft that she lost her house, Derek wrote. The small business owner in Texas who almost went bankrupt because of network embezzlement. The elderly man in Florida who lost his retirement savings to network investment scams. I helped create an organization that destroyed all these people's financial futures. But the part of the letter that affected me most was Derek's acknowledgement of our family dynamics. I spent years believing I was special, that I deserved advantages and support that you didn't get. I convinced myself that your success came easily while mine required help. I never recognized that you were working twice as hard to achieve half the recognition, and that the help I was getting often came at your expense. The letter concluded with something I'd never expected to read from Derek. Elena, you are the person I should have tried to become instead of the person I tried to compete with. Your integrity, your work ethic, your resilience in the face of family dysfunction. These are the qualities that actually define success. I hope someday I can earn your forgiveness, but I understand if that's not possible. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Dad, do you think Derek is actually changing, or is he just saying what he thinks people want to hear? I think federal prison has a way of forcing people to confront reality without the ability to charm or manipulate their way out of uncomfortable truths. Whether Derek uses that confrontation to become a better person remains to be seen. And Mom, how is she handling everything? Dad's expression darkened slightly. Your mother is facing her own consequences. The IRS is investigating her role in hiding Derek's income sources for tax purposes. She may face charges for conspiracy to commit tax fraud. Is she still blaming me for everything that happened? No, actually, she's been in therapy twice a week since Derek's arrest. Her therapist helped her understand that enabling Derek's behavior was a form of child abuse, both toward Derek, who never learned to face consequences, and toward you, who was sacrificed to maintain the enabling relationship. Child abuse. Emotional abuse specifically. Years of dismissing your achievements while praising Derek for mediocrity. Years of prioritizing his needs while ignoring yours. Years of making you feel like you had to earn love while giving Derek unconditional support regardless of his behavior. I sat back in my chair processing this new framework for understanding my childhood and young adult experiences. I'd always known our family dynamics were unhealthy, but hearing them described as abusive gave me permission to feel angry about treatment I'd previously just accepted as normal. Dad, why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to understand that none of Derek's success was legitimate, and none of the family dynamics that favored him were justified. Because you deserve to know that every achievement you made despite our dysfunction was twice as impressive as anything Derek accomplished with family support. Dad stood up to leave but paused at my front door. Elena, there's one more thing. Next month, Derek is being sentenced. The prosecution is recommending 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. If you want to attend the sentencing hearing, I'll go with you. Why would I want to attend? To hear the judge acknowledge the scope of Derek's crimes and the justice of his consequences. To see the legal system validate everything you've been saying about accountability and personal responsibility. And if I don't want to attend, then I'll respect that choice completely. You've already done more than enough to ensure that justice was served. After Dad left, I sat in my beautiful new apartment surrounded by evidence of the financial security and professional success that Derek's crimes had inadvertently created for me. But more importantly, I was surrounded by evidence that I mattered, that my achievements were real and valuable, that I deserved the same respect and support that had always been freely given to Derek. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a family member who actually saw me as worthy of protection and celebration. It had taken a criminal investigation and a heart attack and a divorce to get there, but it was something. 6 months after starting my new position as Director of Financial Compliance at Morrison Industries, I was invited to present at the National Association of Fraud Examiners annual conference. The presentation topic, Family-Connected Financial Crimes When Personal Relationships Complicate Professional Investigations. Standing behind the podium in front of 300 fraud investigators, corporate executives, and federal agents, I felt a mixture of pride and surreal disbelief. A year ago, I was just another accountant whose family dismissed her work as unimportant. Now I was being recognized as a national expert on the exact kind of financial crimes Derek had committed. Financial fraud often involves exploitation of personal relationships. I began looking out at an audience that included Agent Coleman and several other FBI investigators who'd worked on Derek's case. When the perpetrator is a family member, victims face unique challenges in recognizing, reporting, and recovering from financial crimes. I described the warning signs I'd missed for months before finally recognizing Derek's embezzlement patterns. The way family loyalty can blind victims to obvious evidence of criminal activity. The emotional complexity of reporting financial crimes committed by people you love. In my case, I continued, the perpetrator had been systematically destroying my financial reputation for 2 years before I discovered his activities. The investigation that followed led to the disruption of a multi-state criminal network that had stolen over $2 million from dozens of victims. During the question and answer session, a corporate security director from Texas asked about the personal cost of exposing family-connected crimes. The personal cost was significant, I admitted. My parents divorced. My brother is serving a federal prison sentence. Our family structure was completely destroyed. But the alternative, continuing to enable criminal behavior, would have resulted in more victims and greater financial damage. After my presentation, I was approached by representatives from 3 major consulting firms who wanted to discuss career opportunities. The FBI offered me a position as a full-time financial crimes investigator. A publisher expressed interest in commissioning a book about family-connected fraud cases. But the most satisfying conversation came with Agent Coleman, who'd attended my presentation, along with several other federal investigators. Ms. Morrison, your work on the Morrison Industries case has become a training example for our Financial Crimes Division. We use your documentation methods and investigation techniques to train new agents. I'm honored. There's something else. The network that Derek was part of. We've now arrested and prosecuted 47 members across 9 states. Total recovered assets exceed $3.2 million. $3.2 million recovered. 47 criminals prosecuted. Dozens of victims who got justice because Derek had finally been forced to cooperate honestly with law enforcement. Agent Coleman, how is Derek doing in federal prison? Better than most white-collar criminals, actually. He's been participating in financial literacy programs, teaching other inmates about the legal consequences of economic crimes. His cooperation with ongoing investigations has been exemplary. Ongoing investigations. Financial fraud networks don't operate in isolation. Derek's testimony has helped us identify connections to other criminal organizations, identity theft rings, money laundering operations, tax fraud schemes. His inside knowledge has been invaluable for dismantling criminal infrastructure that extends far beyond the original embezzlement network. So Derek's cooperation was continuing to generate positive outcomes even from inside federal prison. His forced honesty was still helping protect potential victims and recover stolen assets. Agent Coleman, when Derek gets out of prison, what happens then? That depends on his choices. Federal probation will monitor his financial activities for 3 years. He'll be restricted from certain types of employment that involve access to corporate finances. But if he continues demonstrating genuine rehabilitation, he'll eventually have opportunities to rebuild his life legitimately. After the conference, I flew back to Cleveland feeling professionally validated in ways I'd never imagined possible. My hotel room was filled with business cards from potential consulting clients, speaking invitations from other professional organizations, and job offers from companies who wanted to hire someone with my specific expertise in family-connected financial crimes. But the most meaningful recognition came in an unexpected phone call from Grandma Margaret's former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd seen news coverage of the fraud network prosecution. "Elena, dear, I wanted you to know how proud your grandmother would be of the work you've done. She always said you had the strongest moral compass in your family." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot. Your grandmother worried about you, you know. She saw how Derek was favored while your achievements were overlooked. She specifically structured her will to provide you with financial independence because she knew your parents wouldn't treat you fairly. She saw the family dynamics that clearly— Oh yes, Margaret was very perceptive about people's character. She told me once that Derek had been spoiled to the point of weakness while you'd been strengthened by adversity. She said adversity would eventually be Derek's downfall and your advantage." Grandma Margaret had been right on both counts. Derek's inability to handle difficulties or accept consequences had led him into increasingly serious criminal behavior. My experience dealing with family dysfunction and financial challenges had prepared me to recognize and respond appropriately to Derek's crimes. "Mrs. Patterson, did Grandma ever say anything else about our family situation?" "She said that someday you'd be forced to choose between protecting Derek and protecting yourself. She hoped you'd be strong enough to choose yourself because enabling Derek's irresponsibility wouldn't help anyone in the long run." So even Grandma Margaret had seen this crisis coming. She'd structured her will and her relationship with me to provide the resources I'd need to choose accountability over family loyalty when the time came. That evening, I called Dad to share news from the conference and the unexpected conversation with Mrs. Patterson. "I'm not surprised your grandmother saw all this coming," Dad said. "Margaret was always the wisest person in our family. She tried to warn me about Derek's character and your mother's favoritism years ago, but I wasn't ready to hear it." "What did she say?" "She said that Derek was being raised to expect success without effort, while you were being taught that effort doesn't guarantee recognition. She predicted that eventually Derek would take shortcuts that got him into serious trouble, while you would achieve success through legitimate hard work." She was right. About everything. "Elena, I got a letter from Derek yesterday. He wanted me to tell you that his victim impact counselor helped him calculate the total financial damage his identity theft caused to your life." "What kind of damage?" "Higher interest rates on loans due to poor credit denied applications for credit and housing fees for credit monitoring services, lost opportunities for financial products that require good credit scores. Derek's estimate is that his identity theft cost you approximately $23,000 in direct financial consequences over 2 years. $23,000. That was money Derek had stolen from me as surely as if he'd taken cash from my wallet, but through methods that were much harder to detect and recover from. Derek has asked federal prosecutors to include financial restitution for your identity theft damages as part of his sentencing agreement. He wants to be legally required to pay you back for the financial consequences of his crimes. He wants to pay me restitution. He says it's the only way he can begin to make amends for the damage he caused. Federal restitution orders are legally enforceable, so you'd eventually recover that money even if it takes Derek years to earn it. I thought about Derek sitting in federal prison calculating the financial impact of his crimes on my life and volunteering to make legal commitments to repair that damage. It was a level of accountability I'd never expected from someone who'd spent years blaming other people for his problems. Dad, do you think Derek has actually learned from this experience? I think federal prison has forced Derek to confront reality without his usual escape routes. Whether that confrontation results in lasting change remains to be seen, but the signs are encouraging. As we talked, I realized that Derek's prosecution had accomplished something I'd never anticipated. It had forced our entire family to be honest about our relationships and our history. Dad had finally acknowledged his enabling behavior and my mother's emotional abuse. Mom was facing her own consequences and getting professional help. Derek was learning to accept responsibility for his choices and their impact on other people. The family we'd been was built on lies and dysfunction, but perhaps we could build something better on a foundation of honesty and accountability. Even if that foundation had been laid by a federal criminal investigation. 1 year after that devastating family dinner where Derek told me I didn't matter, I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse watching my brother stand before a judge to receive his final sentence. The courtroom was packed with federal investigators, corporate executives from companies Derek had stolen from, and other victims of the fraud network he'd helped expose. Derek looked different than he had a year ago. Prison had aged him, but more than that, he carried himself differently. Gone was the arrogant swagger that had characterized his personality for most of his adult life. In its place was something I'd rarely seen from Derek: genuine humility. Mr. Morrison, Judge Patricia Williams, began, "You have pleaded guilty to conspiracy wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. These crimes resulted in significant financial harm to multiple victims and required extensive federal resources to investigate and prosecute." Derek stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back as the judge continued. "However, the court acknowledges your exceptional cooperation with federal investigators. Your testimony has led to the prosecution of 47 additional defendants and the recovery of over $3 million in stolen assets." I glanced around the courtroom and saw Agent Coleman nodding approvingly. Derek's cooperation had exceeded everyone's expectations and had genuinely helped protect future victims from similar crimes. "Mr. Morrison, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Derek stepped forward to the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Your Honor, I want to acknowledge the harm I've caused to my victims, my family, and the companies I stole from. For years, I told myself that my crimes were victimless, that I was just taking money from large corporations that wouldn't miss it. But working with federal investigators has shown me the real impact of financial fraud." He paused, looking directly at me in the courtroom gallery. "I destroyed my sister's credit rating and financial security for 2 years. I enabled a criminal network that stole millions of dollars from dozens of victims. I betrayed the trust of employers who gave me opportunities I didn't deserve." Derek's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "Your Honor, I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I'm committed to spending the rest of my life trying to make amends. I've requested that my sentencing include financial restitution for all my victims, and I plan to continue cooperating with any future investigations that might help recover stolen assets or prevent additional crimes." Judge Williams nodded and consulted her notes. "Mr. Morrison, given your cooperation and demonstrated remorse, this court sentences you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay restitution totaling $147,000 to be distributed among your victims." 6 years. Derek would be 37 when he got out of prison, old enough to have learned from his mistakes, but young enough to rebuild his life legitimately. The restitution order meant I would eventually recover not just the money he'd stolen, but compensation for the credit damage and financial consequences his crimes had caused. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time and mouthed the words, "Thank you. Thank you for refusing to enable his criminal behavior, for forcing him to face consequences that ultimately led to his cooperation and rehabilitation, for choosing accountability over family loyalty when doing so was difficult and painful." After the sentencing hearing, Agent Coleman approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Ms. Morrison, I wanted you to know that Derek's case has become a training example for federal prosecutors. His transition from defendant to cooperative witness demonstrates how accountability can sometimes lead to genuine rehabilitation." How is he doing in federal prison? Exceptionally well. He's been teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates and working with victim advocates to help other fraud victims understand their rights and recovery options. Prison officials describe him as a model inmate who's genuinely committed to rehabilitation. We walked outside into the bright spring sunshine, and I thought about how dramatically my life had changed since that family dinner a year ago. "Agent Coleman, what's the status of the broader network investigation?" 47 prosecutions completed with sentences ranging from 18 months to 15 years. Total asset recovery now exceeds $4 million. The network has been completely dismantled, and our investigation techniques are being used to identify similar criminal organizations. $4 million recovered. Dozens of criminals prosecuted. A major fraud network eliminated. Derek's forced cooperation had ultimately accomplished more good than his crimes had accomplished harm. As I drove home from the courthouse, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned from this experience. Family loyalty without accountability isn't really loyalty. It's enablement that ultimately hurts everyone involved. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish when others are systematically undermining your well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to protect them from the consequences of their actions. Later that evening, I was working in my home office when I received an unexpected letter. The return address showed it was from federal prison, but the sender wasn't Derek. It was from Marcus Thompson, one of the fraud network members whose prosecution had resulted from Derek's cooperation. Ms. Morrison. The letter began, "I know this is unusual, but I wanted to thank you for exposing the network that I was part of. When I was arrested, I was angry and blamed your brother for cooperating with investigators. But participating in victim impact programs has shown me the real harm our crimes caused." Marcus went on to describe how the victim impact sessions had forced him to confront the human consequences of financial fraud. The families who'd lost savings, the small businesses that had nearly gone bankrupt, the individuals whose credit had been destroyed. "Your brother's cooperation led to my prosecution, but it also led to my understanding of why that prosecution was necessary. The network wasn't just stealing money. We were destroying people's financial futures and undermining trust in legitimate business relationships." The letter concluded with something that brought tears to my eyes. "Ms. Morrison, your decision to report financial crimes instead of covering them up probably prevented dozens of additional victims from being harmed. Thank you for choosing justice over family loyalty. It was the right choice, even though it must have been incredibly difficult." I folded the letter carefully and added it to a file I'd been keeping of correspondence related to Derek's case. Letters from other victims thanking me for my role in the investigation. Notes from federal agents describing how my documentation techniques had improved their investigation methods. Articles from professional publications about my work in family-connected financial crimes. All evidence that my decision to expose Derek's crimes had been the right choice, despite the personal cost. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the question that had tormented me for months: had I done the right thing by turning in my own brother? The answer, I realized, was unquestionably yes. By refusing to enable Derek's criminal behavior, I had protected future victims from financial fraud, helped recover millions of dollars in stolen assets, forced Derek to confront the consequences of his actions in ways that led to genuine rehabilitation, established professional expertise that allowed me to help other fraud victims. Finally received the family recognition and respect I deserved for years. Most importantly, I had learned that I mattered. My financial security mattered. My professional achievements mattered. My right to be treated with respect and honesty mattered. Derek's attempt to convince me that I was unimportant had ultimately proven the opposite. I was important enough to stand up for myself, important enough to refuse manipulation and abuse, important enough to choose justice over dysfunction. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I received one final letter from federal prison. This one was from Derek, written on the anniversary of his arrest. Elena. It began. Today marks 1 year since you made the decision that saved my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. If you hadn't forced me to face consequences for my crimes, I would have continued escalating my criminal behavior until I either got myself killed or hurt someone else badly enough to face decades in prison. Derek's letter described his progress in prison rehabilitation programs and his growing understanding of how criminal behavior affects entire communities, not just immediate victims. I've been working with a therapist who specializes in criminal thinking patterns. She's helped me understand that my sense of entitlement and my habit of blaming others for my problems started long before I began committing crimes. The family dynamics that enabled my irresponsibility were actually preparing me for criminal behavior. But the part of the letter that meant the most to me was Derek's acknowledgement of what I'd endured. Elena, I spent our entire childhood and my adult life believing I was special and deserving of advantages that you didn't get. I never recognized that you were working twice as hard to achieve half the recognition. I never appreciated that your integrity and work ethic were exactly the qualities that define real success. The letter concluded with a promise that gave me hope for Derek's future. When I'm released from prison, I want to spend my life helping other families recognize and address the dysfunction that enables financial crimes. I want to work with victim advocacy groups and fraud prevention organizations. I want to use my experience to help prevent other people from making the choices I made. As I finished reading Derek's letter, I realized that our family's crisis had ultimately created opportunities for all of us to become better people. Derek was learning accountability and developing empathy for crime victims. Dad had found the courage to end an emotionally abusive marriage and prioritize honesty over peace. Mom was getting professional help for behavior patterns that had damaged both her children in different ways. And I had discovered that I was strong enough to choose justice over dysfunction, even when that choice was painful and complicated. The family dinner where Derek told me I didn't matter had actually been the beginning of me learning that I did matter, that I mattered enough to protect myself from financial crimes, that I mattered enough to demand respect and honest treatment, that I mattered enough to refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal disappointed people I loved. Now, as Director of Financial Compliance at a major corporation and a federal consulting investigator whose work had helped dismantle a multi-million-dollar criminal network, I knew exactly how much I mattered. I mattered enough to have built a career helping protect other people from the kind of financial crimes Derek had committed against me. I mattered enough to have professional recognition, financial security, and the respect of colleagues who valued my expertise and integrity. Most importantly, I mattered enough to myself to never again accept treatment that suggested otherwise. Derek's crimes had been terrible and destructive, but they had also created opportunities for justice rehabilitation and personal growth that might never have existed otherwise. Sometimes the worst experiences in life teach the most valuable lessons about strength, integrity, and what really matters. The lesson I learned from this experience is simple, but profound. When someone shows you through their actions that they don't believe you matter, believe them, and then prove them wrong by living a life that demonstrates exactly how much you do matter. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? How do you handle situations where people close to you don't treat you with the respect you deserve? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about standing up for yourself and finding strength in difficult family situations. And don't forget to share this story with someone who might need to hear that they matter regardless of what anyone else has told them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you always have the right to choose accountability over enablement, even when that choice is difficult. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to protect someone from the consequences of their own actions. Wishing you strength, integrity, and the courage to know your own worth.